a favorable deal, and the future of alchemy. Khadgar's mood was exceptionally bright. With this successful cooperation, he had not only pleased Mage Merlin, but also established a potential long-term relationship with a future master alchemist. For any auction house, securing the trust of an up-and-coming great alchemist was invaluable. But to have an alchemist poised to become a master favor their establishment, that was an unparalleled opportunity. The thought alone filled Khadgar with excitement. He could already see the endless possibilities ahead. Raising the auction hammer, he prepared to seal the deal. 3 million gold, going once, 3 million gold, going twice. High Mage Khadgar, please wait. A voice suddenly echoed through the venue. A hush fell over the hall as a young mage hurried inside. It was Ryan Monshi, the eldest son of the Monshi family, the very same prodigy who had become a great mage before the age of 30. An unexpected turn. Khadgar's sharp eyes flickered with interest. This sudden interruption could mean only one thing, a new bid. And sure enough, Ryan walked straight into the Monshi family's private box before the announcement came. For 1 million gold. The Monshi family is willing to purchase both potions for 4 million gold. A stunned silence swept through the auction hall. This wasn't just expensive, it was utterly insane. Throughout the history of the Blackhorn auction house, no potion had ever commanded such an astronomical price. Even if one factored in the value of befriending a master alchemist, this price was unreasonable. And yet it had happened. Every guest in the hall stared in disbelief at the Monshi family's box, as if trying to see through the walls and understand their motives. Why would Monshi, who had previously remained silent, suddenly jump to 4 million gold after Ryan's arrival? Had they gone mad? Even Sasu of the Silver Moon Mercenary Group, one of the fiercest bidders that night, stood frozen. He almost raised his hand, but ultimately lowered it, sighing in frustration. "I give up," he muttered, his expression grim. Khadgar smirked inwardly. He loved moments like this. 4 million gold, going once, for 1 million gold, going twice, for 1 million gold sold. The auction hammer fell, officially closing the deal. But the real discussion was only beginning. Inside the Monshi family's box, as the 2 potions were delivered to their private booth, even the Monshi family members were in shock. Mason Monshi gaped at the vials, his mind unable to process the situation. "For 1 million gold," he murmured, voice filled with disbelief. For 2 potions? If his father hadn't been the one to place the bid, Mason might have checked him for a fever. But Monshi, their family patriarch, looked completely unfazed. "What do you know?" Monshi replied, his tone calm and confident. "This is what your uncle wanted." The moment the word uncle was spoken, Mason's face turned pale. To the outside world, the Monshi family's power revolved around its wealth and Ryan's growing influence as a mage. But within the family, they knew the truth. Their real backbone was someone almost no one in Thousand Sails City had even heard of. The shadow behind the Monshi family. Solon Monshi, Monshi's younger brother. Taken by a mage from the Black Tower as an infant, Solon had lived his entire life in the shadows of that powerful organization. For nearly 5 decades, he had been a ghost, never returning home, not even when their father died. To most, he was forgotten. But a dozen years ago, Solon came back. He had met with Monshi in secret, and after a long conversation, he had taken Ryan away. When Ryan finally returned years later, he was already a great mage, far ahead of his peers. To this day, Monshi never fully understood his younger brother. There was a deep sense of respect, a hint of dread, and a constant awareness of his overwhelming power. As far as Monshi was concerned, as long as Solon Monshi existed, the Monshi family would never fall, no matter what happened to them in Thousand Sails City. So when Solon ordered Monshi to acquire these potions, the family patriarch did not hesitate, even if it meant spending 4 million gold. A new ambition. Monshi turned his gaze to the 2 potions, his mind already working through the larger picture. With Loch Merlin dead and the flashing gold chamber of commerce ruined, the alchemy market in Thousand Sails City was wide open. For years, the Monshi family had been kept out of the industry, largely due to Loch Merlin's dominance. But now, Now, nothing stood in their way. Manchi had written dozens of letters to Solon, seeking the Black Tower's backing in taking over the alchemy trade. Until now, Solon had never responded. But tonight was different. Tonight, after hearing about the volcano potion and ghost potion, Solon had acted immediately. That was all Manchi needed to know. This was the chance he had been waiting for, and he wouldn't waste it. Ryan, Manchi said suddenly, his tone serious. Keep an eye on the Gilded Rose. I have a feeling that Merlin Brat is not as simple as he seems. A growing threat. At first, Maffa Merlin had seemed insignificant, a mere novice alchemist struggling to keep his shop afloat. Even when he had revived the Gilded Rose, or when he had humiliated the 9th-rank mage, Manchi had barely paid attention. A small shop run by a young mage? That was nothing to worry about. But tonight had changed everything. Maffa Merlin had casually spent 50,000 gold on Styx water, a sum that should have been far beyond his reach. Then, he bid 1.2 million gold for red flame fish oil, winning it without hesitation. That kind of liquidity was unnatural, and the more Manchi thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. The shipwreck of Loch Merlin was something he understood better than anyone. If he didn't stop the Gilded Rose now, he could end up regretting it forever. There was still time, but not much. He would destroy the Gilded Rose before it could become a true competitor. An anxious escape. As Manchi brooded over his plans, Mason was growing restless. The auction had ended, but his father showed no signs of leaving. If I waste any more time here, that Merlin Brat might get away. Unable to bear it any longer, Mason found an excuse to slip out. Manchi didn't even notice. His mind was entirely focused on his next move. Soon, he thought, when those two great alchemists arrive, the Gilded Rose will be completely wiped out. A slow smile crept onto Manchi's face. Everything is set up for revenge. Mason strode out of the private box, dragging Jonathan along with him, his expression twisted with arrogance. "Let's go," he sneered. "This young master will help you vent your anger." As they left, Mason called over a few mercenaries hired by the Manchi family. Among them was Mengsk, a 9th-rank swordsman, one of the strongest warriors in their employ. With such a capable bodyguard by his side, Mason felt untouchable. His eyes swept across the venue, searching for Maffa Merlin. Once I find him, Mason thought, I'll give him a choice. Eat 2 glass bottles or eat 2 glass bottles and then get beaten senseless. Yet, no matter how much he searched, Lin Yun was nowhere to be found. What Mason didn't know was that at the end of the auction, Lin Yun had been invited to a private reception by Khadgar. A profitable evening. Inside the Blackhorn Auction House's reception room, Khadgar sat across from Lin Yun, smiling brightly. "Mage Merlin," Khadgar began, his tone respectful. "Your 2 potions sold for a total of 4 million gold. After deducting the 2 million gold you spent on auctions, along with the 120,000 gold in fees, your total earnings amount to 1,880,000 gold." As he spoke, he handed over a crystal card. "This sum can be withdrawn at any Blackhorn Chamber of Commerce branch across No Scent." Khadgar's eyes gleamed as he watched Lin Yun accept the card. To him, this young mage wasn't just a person, he was a walking, talking goldmine. After all, master alchemists were legendary figures. With just their knowledge and skill, they could turn any material into a fortune. They could create miracles, producing items so rare and powerful that people would kill to obtain them. And today's auction was proof of that. The 2 potions sold tonight had brought in a staggering 4 million gold. The Blackhorn Auction House's cut was 3%, which meant that, with just a few words from Khadgar, the auction house had earned the equivalent of an inheritance magic tool. But beyond the money, tonight's event had cemented the auction house's reputation. The eastern regions would be buzzing with news of this legendary auction. The next time they held an event, wealthy patrons and powerful alchemists would be lining up for the chance to sell and bid. And all of this was thanks to Lin Yun. Khadgar's smile widened as he leaned forward slightly. "Mage Merlin," he said, his voice warm, "should you ever have more valuable items to sell, I sincerely hope you'll consider the Blackhorn Auction House first." Lin Yun chuckled inwardly. He understood exactly what Khadgar was doing. But this wasn't a bad thing. For Mage, finding rare materials was a constant struggle. And in all of Thousand Sail City, no place had better access to rare magical resources than the Blackhorn Auction House. If he could maintain a good relationship with Khadgar, it would save him countless hours of searching for ingredients. And to a mage, time was the most valuable resource of all. Of course, Lin Yun replied smoothly. The two men quickly struck a deal, formalizing a cooperative relationship. Then, Lin Yun handed Khadgar a list. A mage's demands. Khadgar took the parchment, and his smile faltered slightly. The list was long, containing over 100 different magic materials. Many of them were so rare that even he had never heard of them. As he skimmed through the items, his confidence wavered. At first, when Lin Yun mentioned rare materials, Khadgar had eagerly agreed. But now, looking at this list, he wasn't so sure. Some of these materials were so difficult to acquire that even the Blackhorn Auction House, one of the most powerful trading hubs in the region, might only be able to locate a handful. For the first time in years, Khadgar hesitated. If this gets out, he thought, no one will believe that the great Khadgar, High Mage and Chief Auctioneer of the Blackhorn Auction House, is nervous in front of a mere young mage. And yet he was, because Lin Yun wasn't just any mage, he was a future master alchemist. And once he reached that level, even archmages would treat him with respect. Finally, after a long silence, Khadgar sighed. Mage Merlin, he admitted, I won't deceive you. Some of these materials are extremely rare. Even with the resources of the Blackhorn Chamber of Commerce, I can't guarantee we'll be able to find them all. But, he added quickly, I promise we will do everything in our power to acquire them for you. Khadgar then closely observed Lin Yun's reaction, fearing that his uncertain answer might damage their new partnership. But Lin Yun simply nodded. That's more than enough, he said. Khadgar had no idea that this list had been compiled from one of Nascent's greatest alchemical encyclopedias. These weren't just rare materials. They were the rarest of the rare, even in the golden age of magic. Lin Yun never expected Khadgar to find all of them. He had simply submitted the list to try his luck. If the auction house could gather even a fraction of these materials, it would be worth it. Meanwhile, Khadgar was racking his brain for ways to deepen their relationship. If I can persuade him to auction off even more potions, or, better yet, agree to produce potions for every auction, the Blackhorn Auction House's influence will skyrocket. But just as he was trying to formulate a strategy, a loud commotion erupted outside. And then, bang! The door to the reception room was kicked open. A fool's entrance. Khadgar's eyes widened in disbelief. Mafa Merlin, let's see where you can run this time. Mason swaggered in, followed by Jonathan and 8 armed mercenaries. Their expressions were hostile, and their intentions unmistakable. For a moment, Khadgar sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Did he just kick down my door? He was the chief auctioneer of the Blackhorn Auction House, a high mage, a great alchemist. Even Solomon of the Sage Tower would knock politely before entering his office. But this idiot had just kicked open the door like a common thug. Even Mason's own mercenaries seemed a little uneasy. But Mason was oblivious. He stormed up to Lin Yun, pulling 2 glass bottles from his pocket. Hey, Mafa Merlin, are you hungry? He sneered. Lin Yun touched his nose, suppressing a laugh. No, he replied, but it sounds like you are. Mason's expression darkened. You still won't admit your mistakes? He waved his hand, and his mercenaries surrounded Lin Yun, drawing their weapons. That was the last straw for Khadgar. What the hell do you think you're doing? His booming voice filled the room, shaking the walls. Mason barely spared him a glance. Old man, mind your own business, he said dismissively. Then he turned to Jonathan and muttered, That old guy looks familiar. Khadgar's eye twitched. This idiot was going to regret this.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Mason had attended the auction, so normally there should be no way for him to not recognize Khadgar. But Mason only had himself to blame. He had been fidgeting in his seat the entire time while waiting for the auction to end, and his eyes weren't on the auction stage at all. His thoughts had been filled with his plans to deal with Lin Yun, to the point that he actually failed to recognize the one that had been conducting the auction. Is this how Manchi educates his son? Khadgar looked grimly at Mason, repressed anger hidden behind his cold voice. Although he did not get up, the High Mage's unique pressure filled the reception room, making it feel like a mountain was crushing them. At novel Benedet. The swirling mana felt like a tornado as even the books in the bookshelves flew out. Are the noble guests of the Blackhorn auction house people that you can embarrass? Khadgar stood up among the swirling pages. He raised his hand, and the 8 weapons flew out of the mercenaries' hands one after the other, sticking themselves to the wall of the reception room. The sound emitted was so piercing that everyone felt their ears go numb. Old man, you dare to make a move on someone of the Manchi family. Facing this sudden unforeseen event, Mason was terrified. He was still holding the 2 glass bottles in his hands, but his legs had already gone soft, and he couldn't move. He could only use his mouth to appear powerful. But before he could say more, he was pulled back by Jonathan. Young master. He is Khadgar, as he explained, his head slowly lowered, and once he was done, he didn't even dare to raise it again. What about Khadgar? Does Khadgar dare to make a move on someone of the Manchi family? Mason reflexively demanded. But just after he finished his sentence, his face froze, and he stuttered, C.A. Khadgar. Mason might have not paid attention to Khadgar's appearance, but that didn't mean that Mason had never heard about him. Who didn't know of Khadgar in Thousand Sail City? He was the chief auctioneer of the Blackhorn Auction House, a high mage, and a great alchemist. Even if Mason was a fool, he knew what the name Khadgar meant. Of course it would be like this. Mason stood there in a daze, still holding the 2 glass bottles in his hands, not putting them back. He was bewildered as he mumbled, "Of course, Mafa Merlin is always this lucky." The scene before him was all too familiar. Mason didn't know why he was so unlucky. Every time he wanted to teach that scoundrel a lesson, something would happen. In the Sage Tower, Solon stood up for him. In the auction house's venue, Fallow stood up for him. And in the auction house's box, even Solomon stood up for him. He finally managed to stop him here, but now Khadgar was standing up for him. How could he be so unlucky? Young master, quickly apologized to High Mage Khadgar. Fortunately, Jonathan reacted fast enough and hurriedly pulled Mason's sleeve to remind him. This wasn't some light offense. Drawing weapons in the reception room of a high mage and threatening his guest. This alone was enough for the entire Manchi family to suffer from the repercussions for provoking the prestige of a high mage. Khadgar would even be justified in killing them on the spot. They had truly jumped head first into a disaster. It would be useless even if Manchi himself showed up. All Jonathan could do now was to hurriedly apologize, hoping that High Mage Khadgar would be magnanimous and wouldn't lower himself to argue with a nobody like himself. Otherwise, it would end up badly. Apologize? Khadgar coldly snorted. Even the temperature in the reception room suddenly plummeted, while that mountain-like pressure made it hard for the 2 men to breathe. Khadgar was truly angry this time. An esteemed High Mage's reception room was intruded upon by a group of people led by Mason, and most importantly, they pointed weapons at Mage Merlin. He was the most important guest of the Blackhorn Auction House, and Khadgar himself had spared no efforts to sweet-talk him in order to establish a cooperative relationship. Yet this Mason suddenly came and asked him to eat 2 glass bottles. At least he was here when they smashed their way in. Otherwise, how would Mage Merlin have ended up if he really had been forced to eat 2 glass bottles? If by any chance Mage Merlin reconsiders his deal with the Blackhorn Auction House, could your Manchi family compensate us for the loss? Thinking of this possible outcome, Khadgar's frightening glare became a bit colder. High Mage Khadgar, I'm sorry, I really didn't know you were there. When Mason, who had always been spoiled ever since he was a child, saw the way this High Mage looked at him, he wept as he apologized. In fact, let alone Mason, even if Manchi himself was here in this situation, his legs would also have gone soft. Crying was an obvious reaction. No matter how foolish Mason was, he knew that a high mage was an existence he couldn't offend. In Thousand Sail City, provoking a high mage was akin to ending one's life. Mason hadn't lived enough yet, so all he could do was beg and apologize as if his life depended on it, hoping Khadgar would let him off. What use is there in apologizing to me? You offended Mage Merlin. So if you want to apologize, then apologize to Mage Merlin. It would be best if Mage Merlin is willing to forgive you otherwise. Khadgar didn't say what would happen, but the cold voice and grim expression terrified Mason. At this time, Mason couldn't care about the former grudges and directly forgot about the matter of the 2 glass bottles. Mage Merlin, I am wrong. I made a mistake. Stop. Lin Yun directly raised his hand, interrupting Mason's performance. This show was a lot inferior to Fallot's. Originally, Lin Yun didn't want to have to pass judgment on Mason's life and death. But Lin Yun knew that Khadgar definitely felt embarrassed right now, so he needed to address the matter, and he still needed to give some face to Manshi. Their family had 2 sons, and if he callously got rid of one, how could the Manshi family accept it? The same was true if Khadgar directly chose to kill him. But Mason had truly committed a grave offense, so it would be inexcusable if he didn't give an apology. Thus, Khadgar's earlier words have been said in order to hand the authority over Mason's punishment to Lin Yun. If Lin Yun was willing to let Mason off, then Khadgar wouldn't offend either side. If he wasn't willing to let Mason off, Khadgar would most likely clench his teeth and get rid of the kid. But in that case, he would owe Khadgar. If Khadgar offended the huge Manshi family for him, how would Lin Yun be able to refuse a special request in the future? That old geezer was too sly. Lin Yun inwardly cursed him, but he didn't plan to owe such a favor. Young Master Mason might have a small misunderstanding with me. Nothing too serious. High Mage Khadgar, if you have time, please help me straighten him out. It's not good to let such misunderstandings linger. There are matters waiting for me at the Gilded Rose, so I'll go first. Mage Merlin truly doesn't have time to stay a while longer. There truly is something, really. Lin Yun firmly declined Khadgar's invitation and took the 4 materials he bought, as well as the crystal card, before leaving Khadgar's reception room. But just as he was about to leave, Lin Yun recalled something and turned around. All right, High Mage Khadgar, if you have time, please confirm for me that young Master Mason ate the 2 glass bottles. Afterwards, Lin Yun returned to the Gilded Rose and went into the alchemy laboratory. As the sun slowly fell, Lin Yun melted the frozen dragon blood, and a drop of the precious blood was dripped into a beaker. At that instant, an azure mist rose up and an intoxicating aura spread through the laboratory. Done. Lin Yun wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked at the azure ripples in the beaker with a rare expression of happiness on his face. This was the mana baptism. Mana baptism could be thought of as shedding one's skin to reach a higher level, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. At the peak of the magic civilization, every newborn kid would have to undergo a mana baptism. Not only would that mana baptism allow them to gather mana for the first time, but it would also thoroughly improve their constitution. Thus, in that era, nearly everyone was a talented mage. What determined one's degree of success would be their effort and luck. In fact, it was a bit late for Lin Yun to use the mana baptism, as that first accumulation of mana wasn't essential to him. The only really useful part was the improvement to his constitution. But this was exactly what the current Lin Yun needed. The flaws in Mafa's body were too serious. It was so serious that even advancing to become a mage had been problematic. Fortunately, it was Lin Yun who had taken over the body. Anyone else, including the original person, would have remained forever as a magic apprentice. The only way to settle that kind of flaw was this bottle of mana baptism. Now, I should prepare to advance to the great mage rank. Lin Yun composed himself and drank the bottle of mana baptism that he had just prepared. He felt the scalding liquid pour down his throat as he remained aware of every change happening throughout his body. Lin Yun estimated that the change would continue for 3 days. Over the course of these 3 days, the mana baptism would gradually improve his body, and the problem of lacking mana sustenance would slowly disappear. When this was over, this body's potential for magic wouldn't be inferior to that of any contemporary genius. At that time, advancing to become a great mage wouldn't be an issue. Because of the effect of the mana baptism, Lin Yun couldn't use too much magic for these 3 days. He would even have to stop his daily meditation. Thus, after Lin Yun left the laboratory, he didn't directly return home for the meditation, but rather, he went to take a look at the Gilded Rose. At the moment, the business of the Gilded Rose was still in the hands of the old butler. Besides occasionally compounding a few potions, Lin Yun almost never got involved in the business operations of the Gilded Rose. The old butler actually didn't complain about this, because he knew that the young master had always been determined to become a mage ever since he was little. After fainting, he lost himself in the magic world, and thus, the old man had always been very careful to not disturb him. If he met any troubles, he would figure out a way to solve them on his own. The Gilded Rose reaching its present state was at least 80% due to the contributions of the old butler. Lin Yun couldn't help thinking that the old butler truly was very skilled when it came to business. When the Gilded Rose restarted its operations, all their assets only added up to a few tens of thousands, but in only 3 months, the Gilded Rose had earned over 300,000 gold. And that wasn't including the stored goods. If those items were sold immediately, they would add another 100,000 gold. The most important product was the downgraded version of the mana baptism. It was dubbed as the Hope Potion by the old butler and was the biggest undisclosed trump card. If the Hope Potion was brought out, it would inevitably create a stir in Thousand Sails City, and every magic apprentice would go crazy. A potion that allowed a magic apprentice to easily reach 9th rank. It was quite obvious that the price of such potions would be frightening. Back at that time, Loch Merlin had been unable to purchase this kind of potion. It was evident from this how expensive such a potion would be. But the Gilded Rose was different. Now, the Gilded Rose had a total of over 30 hope potions, and each bottle could create a 9th rank magic apprentice. With such a large stock, if they wanted to sell all of it, they wouldn't be able to sell them at too high of a price. The old butler estimated that the most suitable price was 200,000 gold per bottle. Ordinary magic apprentices definitely wouldn't be able to afford the hope potion, and thus, the true customers were the children of the most influential people in Thousand Sails City. Many of them were the same as the original Mafa, ambitious with regards to magic, but without the necessary talent. Although a hope potion couldn't make them become mages, becoming a 9th rank magic apprentice was a huge temptation. After saving the time that would normally be needed to reach the 9th rank, they could slowly take their time or would try to think of another way to bridge the final gap. With this kind of potential customer, the price definitely couldn't be too low. If the price was marked at 10 or 20,000 gold per bottle, people might think that there was an issue with the potion. But too high a price wouldn't work either. There weren't many people who would spend several hundred thousands or even $1 million to cultivate a 9th rank magic apprentice. In the end, perhaps only 3 or 4 customers would make a purchase. So 3 or 4 bottles would sell in that case. But what about the remaining ones? Would they be left for the old butler to drink? Thus, the old butler thought for a long time before setting the temporary price at 200,000 gold. Lin Yun didn't express any opinion on this. On one hand, the old butler had always been in charge of the Gilded Rose, so he had a greater understanding of the market than anyone else. On the other hand, Lin Yun didn't pay much attention to the 30 bottles of hope potions. Because the Gilded Rose had just started, Lin Yun had to personally compound potions for sale, but once the Gilded Rose was on a good track, he would definitely not spend time on that anymore. A mage's time was too valuable. He couldn't waste it. Lin Yun thought of this as he entered the Gilded Rose. Today was the first day of the month, the day that the Mercenary Guild provided missions, and also the best day for the Gilded Rose. When the mercenaries got new quests, they would naturally make preparations, and although the Gilded Rose in the Victorious Return Main Street wasn't the best such store yet, it's still under the management of the old butler. The Gilded Rose had already slowly recovered its splendor. Among the numerous stores of Thousand Sails City, it should be among the top 10, and it had the superior advantage of being located in the Victorious Return Street. After choosing their new missions, most of the mercenaries would choose to go to the Gilded Rose, which was only a street away from the Mercenary Guild. But today, after Lin Yun came to the Gilded Rose, he felt something wrong. The business was good, there were many people, and the clerks were busy, but Lin Yun felt that something wasn't quite right. After thinking about it for a moment, he noticed that old butler wasn't there. That wouldn't be strange on any other day, but it was currently the first day of the month, the best day for the Gilded Rose. Lin Yun clearly remembered that every month, the old butler would definitely oversee the Gilded Rose on this day, even back when Loch Merlin was around. Why wasn't he here today? The more Lin Yun thought about it, the stranger he felt the situation was. Could a problem have come up? Remy, come here. As he thought of it, Lin Yun couldn't refrain from checking on the matter, so he beckoned Remy over. Boss, how come you came? When Remy saw Lin Yun, he hurriedly handed all of his workload to another clerk and ran over. I came to take a look. Oh, by the way, Remy, do you know where Uncle Pave went? I heard that Boss Pave went out early in the morning to retrieve a batch of magic materials. Went out early in the morning. Lin Yun frowned when he heard this. There had always been someone appointed to retrieve the Gilded Rose's materials. Even if they had their hands full and old Pave went to retrieve them instead, it still shouldn't take that long. Enough time had passed for him to make a few trips, so how could he still not be back yet? Where did he go to retrieve the materials? It seems, Remy thought about it before saying with a bit of uncertainty, it seems to be at the Frost Wolf Mercenary Group. The Frost Wolf Mercenary Group? Lin Yun nodded and lowered his head. The Frost Wolf Mercenary Group wasn't that big. It only had 20 people, and their fame and strength were far inferior compared to the colossal Silver Moon. But they had been cooperating well with the Gilded Rose these past few months. The materials they harvested were mostly sold to the Gilded Rose, and the price was relatively fair. The old butler had boasted about the arrangement a few times. Had it novel been at? At first, Lin Yun was worried when he heard that the old butler had personally gone to pick up materials, but since it was the Frost Wolf Mercenary Group, it was unlikely that there were any problems. Thus, Lin Yun didn't ask again and only looked around the store a bit more. The business was really good and everyone was lively. Lin Yun thought that since he couldn't undergo his usual meditation, he would simply help the alchemists who were at work. After the Gilded Rose reopened for business, they recruited for alchemists. They all had pretty decent abilities, and because the alchemy laboratory had been occupied by Lin Yun, the old butler opened up the second floor for them. Now, these 4 alchemists, as well as the several dozens of apprentice alchemists acting as helpers, were working hard in this new alchemy laboratory. Lin Yun had never shown his alchemy abilities in front of these 4 alchemists, but some occasional exchanges made them aware that this young boss wasn't ignorant in the field of alchemy. Thus, they actually welcomed Lin Yun's help, but they didn't dare to give the most important work to him. They only gave him some simple work, such as enchanting. Lin Yun wasn't disappointed, as he was only there to pass time anyways. Noon quickly passed, and when evening arrived, the lively Gilded Rose slowly emptied out. The mercenaries took their supplies and left the Gilded Rose while the clerks started cleaning and tidying up everything as they got ready to end the day. The alchemists completed their work for the day, and after greeting Lin Yun, they were getting ready to return home. Lin Yun chatted with a few of the alchemists while walking down the stairs. At that time, he caught sight of an anxious butler walking over. "Young master, you came?" The old butler was clearly surprised at Lin Yun's appearance. "I was staying at home with nothing to do, so I thought that I might as well come and take a look." "Oh, right. I heard from Remy that you went to the Frost Wolf Mercenaries to get a batch of ingredients. Did everything go smoothly?" At the mention of this topic, the old butler's expression suddenly seemed rather bitter. "Young master, I think we might be in trouble." We had already arranged to buy that batch of materials, but I went at dawn today and they told me that it had already been sold to others. I was a bit suspicious then, but afterwards, I went to several groups that had pretty good business relations with us. And after walking all day, almost all the groups told me that their materials had already been sold to others. They all said that. The old butler sighed after answering. For the Gilded Rose, which had just recovered, this was truly a devastating hit. It would still be manageable if it was only the Frost Wolf Mercenaries, but there were about 10 businesses often cooperating with the Gilded Rose in the past, which were now all saying that they had sold out of materials. This was quite serious, cutting off the supplies required for the Gilded Rose to operate. Had it novel been it at? As an alchemy shop, if they lost their supply of materials, they would definitely be heading straight for a dead end. No matter how brilliant an alchemist was, it was impossible to make products out of nothing. If they couldn't find a new source to supply their resources, even if the Gilded Rose struggled as hard as possible, they would ultimately end up bankrupt. Don't worry, I'll go out tomorrow and see if I can find another supplier for these materials, the old butler said after thinking about it. He couldn't come up with any good solution. Ultimately, he decided that he would get in touch with the lowest mercenary group and contact a few more businesses to see whether they could gather some materials to survive the crisis facing them. No need, Lin Yin shook his head. He clearly understood the old butler's train of thought, but the lowest mercenary groups all consisted of weaklings, and the missions they could accomplish were worth a few hundred gold at best. It was simply impossible for them to gather many important materials. Even if the old butler was lucky and managed to get in touch with a few businesses, it probably still wouldn't amount to what the Frostwolf mercenaries usually supplied. And let alone those minor mercenaries, Lin Yin wasn't even very satisfied with the Frostwolf mercenaries either. After developing the Gilded Rose, there was a need for a new supplier. As for who this new supplier was, Lin Yin had already thought of this matter in the Blackhorn auction house, but he had yet to come to a conclusion, so he hadn't let the old butler know of his thoughts on matter. The incident with the Frostwolf mercenaries today gave Lin Yin the perfect opportunity. You don't need to worry about this matter. I'll go out and find a new supplier for the Gilded Rose tomorrow. How about I accompany you? The old butler wasn't too reassured. Even a fool would notice that someone was targeting the Gilded Rose based on the day's events. The Frostwolf mercenaries, who had always been on good terms with them, were acting like this. Finding a new supplier wasn't something that could be solved with just a few sentences. No need, you look after the shop. After seeing the old butler off, Lin Yin returned to the alchemy laboratory. The next morning, at dawn, Lin Yin went to the Lion Monarch Street in the southern part of the city. If the Victorious Return Street was classified as part of the Mage Guild, then the Lion Monarch Street was within the influence of the mercenaries. Of the 10 top mercenary groups of Thousand Sail City, 7 of them were stationed in the Lion Monarch Street, which included the one ranked at the forefront, the Silver Moon Mercenaries. The ones Lin Yin came to look for today were precisely the Silver Moon Mercenaries. The person who received Lin Yin was a deputy leader called Marco. With Lin Yin's current status, sending a deputy leader to receive him was already too much. If it had been some ordinary mage, let alone a deputy leader, even a deputy captain would be considered pretty good. But the problem was that Lin Yin didn't come here to meet a deputy leader this time. Nothing could be done about it, as the business he had with the mercenary group wasn't something that a deputy leader could make a decision on. Thus, after exchanging greetings, Lin Yin directly requested to have a chat with Leader Sasu. Once he said that, Deputy Leader Marco's face suddenly no longer looked friendly. To be honest, this couldn't be blamed on him. Here was a 20-year-old mage with no support that only owned an alchemy shop, and they had already sent a deputy leader for him, out of respect for his dead father. But that wasn't enough. That young mage wanted to meet the leader himself for a chat. Is Leader Sasu someone you can meet? Let alone you. Even people at the peak of Thousand Sail City like Mon Chi of the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce or Sasu of the Viper Nest would have to notify us ahead of time before being able to meet Leader Sasu. Leader Sasu isn't here. Marco's words weren't as polite as before. But Lin Yin didn't take offense and only smiled before whispering, "It's about the ghost potion." I said Leader Sasu isn't here. What about the ghost potion? Marco gave Lin Yin an impatient look, intending to say a few unpleasant words to drive back this young mage who thought too highly of himself when he suddenly realized what the young mage had just said. Fuck, it's about the ghost potion. Marco panicked and almost bit his tongue. Ghost potion, you just said. Ghost potion. Yes, ghost potion. Sorry for my words. Excuse me, I must leave. After the deputy leader confirmed that he hadn't misheard, he immediately stood up and left the reception room. Afterwards, Sasu came in. Lin Yin's conversation with Sasa lasted only 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, Lin Yin left the camp of the Silver Moon Mercenaries and returned to the Gilded Rose. The old butler didn't even know that Lin Yun had gone to the Silver Moon mercenaries. But that short 10-minute conversation quickly brought a significant shock to Thousand Sails City. One day later, Sasu publicly announced two things. First, the Silver Moon mercenaries would march for Edge Rift at the start of the next month and eliminate the rock trolls that had been occupying the place for 100 years, thus reopening the golden trade route between Thousand Sails City and Angel Coast. Second, the Silver Moon mercenaries and the Gilded Rose had established an official partnership. The partnership involved a few fields, including the supply of magic materials, the purchase of alchemy items, the sharing of all kinds of techniques, and even the establishment of a joint armed caravan. The announcement of these two decisions by Sasu immediately alarmed the entire Thousand Sails City. The matter of the annihilation of the rock trolls wasn't a problem, as this was a quest that the Chambers of Commerce had jointly poured money into to offer a reward at the Mercenary Guild for 100 years. In the past dozen years, the Silver Moon mercenaries had slowly reached the peak of Thousand Sails City. Many people had realized that sooner or later, the Silver Moon mercenaries would head to Edge Rift to finish the task and claim the bounty. Because once this 100-year-old quest was cleared, the prestige of the Silver Moon mercenaries would inevitably reach new heights. Ultimately, they would even rise to become one of the mercenary groups at the peak of the kingdom. Although the decision seemed somewhat hurried, it was still within everyone's expectations. But the second announcement baffled everyone. Why would the esteemed Silver Moon mercenaries choose an alchemy shop as their business partner? Even if the predecessor of this alchemy store was Thousand Sails City's flashing gold chamber of commerce, that was only its predecessor. The only things that remained of the Gilded Rose were an old man and a youth, for alchemists, and a few dozen apprentice alchemists. This was the entire Gilded Rose. So how could they become the Silver Moon mercenaries' business partner? And a close business partner at that? This was like tying the Silver Moon mercenaries to the Gilded Rose. Whoever dared to offend the Gilded Rose in the future would have to think about the Silver Moon mercenaries' reaction. In fact, there was no need to wait for the future because there was someone already thinking about it right now. This was the leader of the Frost Wolf mercenaries, Andrew. The Frost Wolf mercenaries also had their camp in the southern part of the city on the Lion Monarch Street. The news of the partnership between the Silver Moon mercenaries and the Gilded Rose quickly reached Andrew's ears. When he heard about it, Andrew turned pale from fear. Others might not know why the Gilded Rose had sought out the Silver Moon mercenaries, but how could Andrew not know about it? Wasn't it because the Frost Wolf mercenaries had stopped supplying the Gilded Rose with magic materials? At first, the Frost Wolf mercenaries had always had a pleasant cooperation with the Gilded Rose, but a few days ago, an influential person had approached them and asked Andrew to stop supplying the Gilded Rose. Furthermore, they paid adequately, so Andrew hadn't thought much of it and just straightforwardly agreed. Why were mercenaries willing to risk their lives? Wasn't it to earn more gold? Since this person brought plenty of gold, what reason did he have to refuse? Moreover, the Gilded Rose wasn't a powerful client that they couldn't afford to offend. In the past, Andrew might have had to think about it some more. After all, the flashing gold chamber of commerce had quite a bit of power. But it wasn't the case now. Loch Merlin had died, and the flashing gold chamber of commerce already fell behind. Only his son and a butler remained. Even if he tore apart the contract, would they even be able to retaliate? Thus, Andrew didn't spend much time thinking about it, and agreed to stop supplying the Gilded Rose. And now, a problem had arisen out of this. No one ever thought that the Gilded Rose would actually look for the Silver Moon mercenaries, and furthermore, that the Silver Moon mercenaries would actually agree to cooperate with them. This was really huge. Sasu was called the Mercenary King of Thousand Sails City. His prestige among the mercenaries was so high that an average person wouldn't even be able to imagine it. It was to the point that with a simple word from Sasu, the Frost Wolf mercenaries could become the public enemy of all mercenaries within Thousand Sails City. Even Andrew's own subordinates would turn against him. Thinking about this, Andrew couldn't help turning pale. Andrew spent a few days in a state of constant fear. Even when sleeping at night, he would frequently be awakened by nightmares, afraid that when he woke up, he would have already become a public enemy of Thousand Sails City. After spending 3 days in such torment, Andrew became thin and pallid, and many of his hairs whitened. On the fourth day, Andrew didn't keep to himself any longer, and he went to the victorious Main Street. He waited an entire afternoon at the Gilded Rose's entrance. He waited till the evening, when he saw Lin Yun coming from his home. Good evening, Mage Merlin. After waiting for all this time, Andrew was cold and hungry. But when he saw Lin Yun, he hurriedly put on a smiling face to greet him. Good evening, Leader Andrew. Lin Yun didn't stop, only turning and nodding as he passed, as he considered it to be a simple greeting. But the problem was that Andrew didn't come today only to greet him. Thus, Andrew had no choice but to catch up to Lin Yun and put on his smiling face once again as he started. Well, Mage Merlin, the Gilded Rose's business seems to be really good. Lin Yun only chuckled in response. At first, Andrew had planned to bring up the topic of the shop doing well to move onto the matter of the magic materials. After getting on that subject, Andrew would seize the opportunity to offer to continue their previous collaboration. At worst, he would admit his mistake. What was losing face compared to being driven away from Thousand Sail City by Sasu? But Lin Yun only chuckled. This chuckle made it very difficult for Andrew. How should he reply to this? How would he take advantage of this? Esteemed mage, please don't toy with me. Lin Yun wasn't actually toying with him. Since he established a partnership with the Silver Moon mercenaries, he had many matters waiting for him to settle. In the past few days, Lin Yun had been busy running around. So how could he still have time to toy with someone he barely knew? After answering with a chuckle, he continued walking toward the entrance of the Gilded Rose, at Novel Benedat. Mage Merlin, please wait. Andrew didn't look good as he hurriedly chased after Lin Yun. Is there something wrong, Leader Andrew? Lin Yun stopped and sized up Andrew, feeling a bit surprised. Cold sweat trickled down Andrew's back. If he could, Andrew would have asked, "Do I freaking look okay to you?" I ran to the Gilded Rose and waited the whole afternoon, into the evening. Now I'm cold and starving. Do you really think I'm idle and have nothing better to do? But thinking of the possible consequences, Andrew didn't dare to say such things. And not only did he not dare to complain, but he also did his best to pull on a fawning smile. Yes, Mage Merlin, I came over today to ask, does the Gilded Rose still need magic materials? Our Frost Wolf mercenary group recently did a few missions and gathered quite an amount of materials. I wonder if the Gilded Rose would like to help us dispose of it. In reality, the Frost Wolf mercenaries hadn't actually gathered such materials, but now wasn't the time to say that. In order to ease the tension with the Gilded Rose, no matter how harsh the conditions were, Andrew could only endure and buy the materials from the marketplace later on, probably at a loss. There is no problem in helping you dispose of them. But Leader Andrew, the funds of the Gilded Rose are quite lacking lately, so I might have to apologize to you about the price. I will talk to Uncle Pave, and then we will proceed with helping you dispose of the materials. We will even give you 50% of their value as a symbolic gesture. 50%. Andrew almost stopped breathing. If he could, Andrew would have loved to spit in Lin Yun's face. This truly was too shameless. He had already lowered himself and looked around for him, eventually waiting an entire afternoon. Despite being cold and hungry, he spoke politely and smiled, but in the end, Merlin asked him for a 50% discount, and he even called it a symbolic gesture. Fuck your symbolic gesture. Andrew struggled for a long time before finally swallowing hard. There was nothing he could do about it, as he was clearly being taken advantage of by Merlin, who had become the partner of the Silver Moon mercenaries. If he said something wrong, even if he didn't do anything, as long as Merlin pouted about it in front of Sasu, Andrew would have to deal with the consequences. Calm, I must remain calm. Andrew took a deep breath and secretly shed a tear as he did his best to maintain his stiff smile. In that case, thank you, Mage Merlin. You're welcome. Lin Yun then politely excused himself before turning to enter the Gilded Rose. Andrew stood there lifelessly. That, "You're welcome," felt like a slap to his face. Lin Yun really didn't care about what Andrew thought, because Lin Yun had more important matters at hand. 3 days had passed, and the mana baptism had already transformed his body, so Lin Yun would no longer be bothered by the flaws of the body that Mafa Merlin had left behind. In other words, Lin Yun could attack the Great Mage realm anytime. That was why he had come to the Gilded Rose. The alchemy laboratory of the Gilded Rose was a place that Lin Yun carefully organized. 3 magic traps were set up in the corridor. He didn't spare any mana on the entrance, as he solidified 2 mage eyes and inscribed 2 alchemy arrays on it. This kind of setup couldn't be considered well fortified, but at least ordinary mages wouldn't be able to enter. Let alone ordinary mages. Even most great mages would have to ask for Lin Yun's authorization before entering. There shouldn't be anyone that would bother him while he advanced to become a great mage. After going to the Gilded Rose, Lin Yun first greeted the old butler and spoke about Andrew's matter before heading for the laboratory. After checking the traps at the entrance, he activated the alchemy array inside. And when he closed the door, he easily supplemented another mage eye. Once he was done, Lin Yun looked for a secluded place to start his longest meditation since becoming a mage. Lin Yun estimated that the meditation this time would take at least 3 days. It was completely different from ordinary meditation. Advancing to Great Mage required one to break through the limit and shatter their mana whirlpool. Only after crushing their mana whirlpool would they be able to have their own magic conducting rune. This was the most important thing for a Great Mage. To some extent, a magic conducting rune was the life imprint of a Great Mage. Not only did that imprint possess earth-shaking power, but it would also continuously evolve with the Great Mage. Thus, when preparing to advance to this rank, one would have to go through a very long meditation, during which they would have to purify their mana whirlpool. Some mages might use potions to help purify the mana whirlpool, such as the spectrum potions that Lin Yun crafted a while back, or the colorful potion Raymond once mentioned. But Lin Yun wouldn't do so. Coming from the last days of No Scent, he understood a lot more than the mages of this era. Once transformed into a magic-conducting rune, a mana whirlpool that had been purified solely relying on itself would be 10 times stronger than one that had been purified through potions. Purifying a mana whirlpool was an extremely painful process, during which mages needed to extract impurities within the mana whirlpool bit by bit. To a mage, this would feel like carving out bits of themselves. The entire process was full of pain and suffering. When Lin Yun entered meditation, his mana whirlpool slowly started rotating. Time slowly passed, while Lin Yun's calm face began to turn pale, and beads of sweat trickled down his forehead. And this was just the beginning. 1 day passed, 2 days passed. On the 3rd day, Lin Yun was in an extremely weak state. He was thin and pallid and emitted worrying mana fluctuations. It felt as if they might go out of control any time. But his eyes were brighter than before. Lin Yun knew that he was in the most powerful state he had ever been in since appearing in this body. The accumulation of mana reached the limit, and after the mana whirlpool was purified, it could only be described as perfect. Those somewhat worrying mana fluctuations weren't because Lin Yun couldn't control his mana, but rather because his mana whirlpool was on the brink of shattering. Lin Yun already stood at the entrance of the Great Mage Realm and only needed a small push. After confirming his state, Lin Yun took a deep breath and slowly began to circulate the mana within his body. At the start, this mana was gentle and soothing, just like a flowing brook. Apart from its shocking purity, it was the same as ordinary meditation. But unlike an ordinary meditation session, after that mana poured into the mana whirlpool, it didn't follow the mana whirlpool's normal pathways. Instead, it silently gathered at the center of the mana whirlpool. Nothing happened at first, but as Lin Yun hastened it, a change appeared in the circulating mana, moving faster and faster. Ultimately, it turned into a surging river with thunderous, roaring waves coursing toward the center of the mana whirlpool. Originally, when Lin Yun advanced to become a mage, he used his powerful mana control to build this almost impeccable mana whirlpool. Otherwise, he wouldn't have managed to defeat that 9th rank mage of the Viper Nest so easily, nor would he have been able to forcibly use the Great Mage level elemental incarnation in the Bone Plane. But now, this almost impeccable mana whirlpool was slowly being deformed by the endless flow of mana. If this happened to another mage, they would be scared to death. It was common knowledge that a mana whirlpool needed to be stable, even when shattering it during the advancement to Great Mage. To a mage, the mana whirlpool was most important. Only when their mana whirlpool was stable enough would they be able to gather mana through meditation and transfer mana to cast spells. In no sense, nearly every mage's first lesson to their disciples would be to cherish their mana whirlpool, because if there was a problem with their mana whirlpool, the path to magic would be severed. Just like Solomon, the current leader of the Mage Guild who became a high mage over 20 years ago. Because his mana whirlpool had been injured in a fight in an active volcano, this rare, talented high mage hadn't made any progress for over 20 years. With Solomon being stymied like this, there was no need to think about the case for an ordinary mage. Any mage who saw Lin Yun's situation would think he was courting death. But it wasn't the same for Lin Yun. He kept urging his mana, continuously expanding his mana whirlpool. The knowledge he held, the abilities he possessed, they already far surpassed what was known in this era. The magic apprentices from this era didn't dare to use mana to batter against the mana whirlpool, because this era's mages had to be careful and safe, not knowing what could cause a problem. Under the surge of mana, the mana whirlpool within Lin Yun's body quickly expanded like an inflating balloon, slowly becoming bigger and bigger, before finally, it exploded with a bang. Losing the restriction from the mana whirlpool, the mana flowing inside started going out of control. It was berserk and chaotic, bashing and shoving inside Lin Yun's body. It wasn't soothing and gentle like before. If someone else experienced the collapse of their mana whirlpool and their mana going berserk, they would likely just close their eyes and die. But this was only the beginning for Lin Yun. The berserk and chaotic mana, wreaking havoc within his body, felt as if 10 spells were being cast at the same time. The pain couldn't be understood if one hadn't experienced it themselves. Sweat slowly trickled down from Lin Yun's forehead, but there wasn't the slightest change in the expression on his face. Lin Yun was like an accurate machine right now. He simply remained steady and only used his powerful control to its maximum to bring each thread of mana under his command. When mana struggled free from the binding of a mana whirlpool, it would become berserk and chaotic like swirling gales and large waves, eroding away every part of his body. Exercising mana control at that point would just be wishful thinking. But Lin Yun managed to do it. By relying on his fine mana control tempered through his life at the end of the magic era, Lin Yun managed to calm the mana and make it flow according to his prepared path. He completely relied on his control to create an intact mana path inside his body. Naturally, that mana path still wasn't stable because the mana whirlpool had already collapsed. Even with Lin Yun's incredible control, he could only use time and patience to slowly wear it down. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. As Lin Yun gradually found it harder to endure, the berserk mana gradually became calmer. Phew! Feeling the change within his body, Lin Yun let out a sigh of relief. The most difficult part was finally dealt with, so the next thing to do was to engrave the magic conducting rune. After completing this step, Lin Yun could officially enter the ranks of great mages. Moreover, the mana within Lin Yun was still in a pure and chaotic state. As long as Lin Yun wanted, he could carve any magic conducting rune. This was an extremely rare opportunity for someone advancing to become a great mage. Among tens of thousands of mages, there might not even be one with such an opportunity. Magic conducting runes were also divided by ranks, just like great mages. The gap between different magic conducting runes could be quite large, perhaps tenfold or more. That gap not only could be felt through the power of spells and the ability to conduct mana, but it would have a crucial impact when advancing to become a high mage. It would be 100 times easier to advance further for a great mage with a top-notch magic conducting rune. This was the reason Lin Yun was taking such great risks. Otherwise, with Lin Yun's great accumulation of mana, he would have already advanced to Great Mage and wouldn't have needed to be so rough with his mana whirlpool, risking a backlash. What Lin Yun wanted was to make the mana return to its primal state. Once it returned to its chaotic primal state, it would be like a piece of white paper, a blank slate. Lin Yun could freely write on it and carve any magic conducting rune. The most difficult part of the breakthrough had already been completed. All that was left was carving a rune, and Lin Yun would become a great mage. But what kind of magic-conducting rune would he carve? Lin Yun frowned. He thought for a long time before realizing that the magic-conducting runes he had been considering before couldn't be used. It wasn't because he couldn't complete them, but because they were too wasteful. That's right, wasteful, added novel Benedet. Lin Yun himself hadn't thought that after the mana returned to its primal state, it would be so pure and so perfect that the magic-conducting runes that he had thought of before would be subpar. In fact, as soon as he drank the mana baptism, Lin Yun had designed a few magic-conducting runes, such as the Extreme Forge for strengthening casting power, Time Hand for improving casting speed, and Endless Spring for improved mana recovery. These magic-conducting runes were among the most perfect ones even at the peak of the magic era, let alone in this era. Even Lin Yun himself had felt satisfied after choosing these few magic-conducting runes, as he felt that these were the most powerful magic-conducting runes that he could inscribe at the present time. But now, Lin Yun felt dissatisfied with them. The mana in its primal chaos state was too pure and perfect, and if he really carved these magic-conducting runes, Lin Yun wouldn't be able to forgive himself for not trying to bring out his full potential. Maybe I should experiment with others. After a slight hesitation, Lin Yun came to a decision. 1 hour later, Lin Yun appeared in the Sage Tower. The one receiving Lin Yun today was surprisingly not Solon, but Solomon. When he saw Solomon, Lin Yun was startled. This was the leader of the Sage Tower, Thousand Sail City's most powerful mage. For him to personally receive someone, they had to be on Khadgar's level. Although Lin Yun had some reputation, when comparing the two, he was still quite far off. Had Solomon recently figured out more about him? This wasn't the first time Lin Yun had come to the Sage Tower. He had been here a few times and even chatted with Solon, who had told him about the temperament of the leader of the Mage Guild. He was like any other mage, engrossed in magic, not caring about most worldly matters, and occasionally irascible. But Lin Yun knew that this seemingly eccentric high mage cherished his words. He wouldn't speak if he didn't need to. What happened in the auction house box was enough to prove it, even his actions around Monchi. Normally, when Lin Yun visited the Sage Tower, he would always be received by Solon. First, their relationship was pretty good, and he could be considered one of the few friends Lin Yun had in Thousand Sail City. Second, Solon was Solomon's disciple. Him receiving Lin Yun showed Solomon's friendly attitude. But Solomon himself had never appeared personally during these visits. Solomon's appearance had a whole different meaning. This high mage represented the Sage Tower, the entire Mage Guild. For him to personally receive Lin Yun would bring a large shock to Thousand Sail City. It was equal to the shock of the Silver Moon Mercenaries announcement, which instantly terrified Andrew of the Frost Wolf Mercenaries. If Solomon was added to the fray, who wouldn't be terrified? So what was the meaning behind his appearance today? Lin Yun didn't know if he should speak first, so he only politely exchanged conventional greetings with Solomon. Mage Merlin, this is the Hell Destroyer scroll from the Blackhorn auction. According to our agreement, the Sage Tower has already finished researching it. It is yours now. Solomon handed a scroll to Lin Yun while speaking. It has only been a handful of days. As you said, Mage Merlin, I hate the Ash Tower more than you do. As for the scroll itself, I don't have much interest in it, and there is no need to spend too much time researching a badly damaged spell after copying its contents. Then I shall thank you, High Mage Solomon. Since Solomon said so, Lin Yun naturally wouldn't refuse. In any case, he intended to enter the Bone Plane once again with his advancement to Great Mage. With a spiritual augment in hand, his chances of survival would be a lot better. Good. I believe that you came to the Sage Tower today for the library, right? Indeed. Then I won't keep you any longer. Lin Yun was a bit startled when he heard this. Solomon came to the reception room himself in order to return a scroll? Wasn't that too nonsensical? Lin Yun originally thought that Solomon had personally received him to discuss some particular matters, but it would be quite odd if it was only to return the scroll. But since he had already said this, Lin Yun could only leave while full of questions before slowly walking over to the library. On the way, Lin Yun's mind was fully focused on trying to understand the meaning behind Solomon's actions. When Lin Yun reached the library and stood in front of a row of bookshelves, his mind was still lingering on the matter, up until Solon's voice came from behind him. "Merlin, what are you looking for?" Solon? You also came? I'm looking for a book on the magic conducting rune creation paradigm, as well as a detailed book on the max formula." Magic conducting rune creation? Solon was taken aback as he stared at Lin Yun for a long time. His face suddenly revealed an expression of shock. You're a great mage now." "Yes, I just advanced." Solon stood there in a daze for a long time before he could recover from the shock. For some time, his mood was quite complicated. Thinking about it, when this young mage called Merlin came to the Sage Tower, he had just formed his mana whirlpool. He could barely be called a first-rank mage at that point. But it hadn't been a few months yet, and he was already ready to engrave a magic-conducting rune, ready to step into the ranks of the great mages. When I worked to become a great mage, I spent 10 years. It wasn't bad, but compared to him, Solon wanted a curse. As he stood there, Solon very much wanted to ask whether he was a human or something else. Mage Solon, Mage Solon. Seeing Solon being silent for such a long time while just staring, Lin Yun couldn't help calling his name twice. Nothing. After being brought back to his senses, Solon hid the grief and indignation. And in order to cover up the fact that he had forgotten himself, he promptly looked for the 2 books that Lin Yun had asked about. Adet Novel Benedet. He was Solomon's disciple. If another mage saw such a situation, a shadow might be cast over their heart, influencing their future on the path of magic. From first-rank mage to great mage in a few months, this wasn't something a human could do. The 2 books Lin Yun was looking for weren't very rare, and after some time, Solon found them and handed them over, reminding him, "I heard teachers say that this magic-conducting rune creation paradigm recently stirred quite a controversy." "Yes, I know." Lin Yun nodded, not going into any more detail. Magic-conducting rune creation paradigm was a very controversial book. Lin Yun already knew that. In fact, some 10,000 years later, this book would be mentioned by those mages at the pinnacle, and as a textbook on what not to do, because it had way too many mistakes. But in this era, the research of the magic conducting runes was far from mature enough, so the controversy could only be felt by the mages at the top. Moreover, even they could only feel it, nothing more. No one could point out what exactly was wrong. In this era, the only one able to raise an issue was Lin Yun. Lin Yun closed his eyes and estimated the number of errors that would appear in this book. Lin Yun clearly knew why such errors would appear and how they would be corrected from his time in the decaying library. But Lin Yun didn't come to find the differences today. The matter of finding out the mistakes would be left for the mages of the future. Lin Yun came today to find a typical magic conducting rune that had been repeatedly mentioned by those powerful mages in this book. The name of that magic conducting rune was Magic Array. Of course, this was a name that would only be attributed to this magic conducting rune 10,000 years later. In this era, people knew of that magic conducting rune as the discarded rune or the worthless rune. The first time it was called this was in Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm, where the magic array was used as a teaching example to show various negative things. The author pointed to the magic array and emphasized how important it was to build the magic array properly. If not carefully created, it would become a discarded rune later. This was also the only method for Lin Yun to build the correct magic array. Just building a magic array wasn't difficult, but managing to create a complete magic array was a whole different story. Let alone now, even at the peak of the magic civilization, there were no more than 5 mages that had a complete magic array. Moreover, these 5 mages never passed down the magic array as their inheritance. This led to Nascent's people being unable to build the magic array after these 5 mages fell at the end of the magic era, like everyone else. In other words, in the decaying library, the records of the magic array were only limited to a few descriptions without giving any real method for someone to build it. Lin Yun thought for a very long time before he managed to recall a book mentioning that the magic array was once called the Discarded Rune, and that the first time the name Discarded Rune was used was in a magic book called Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm. The author was apparently a high mage from the 3rd dynasty who wasn't famous, but 10,000 years later, he was recorded in history thanks to this book. Naturally, the way he got into the pages of history was a bit strange. After Lin Yun thanked Solon, he took the 2 books and found a seat before starting to flip through the pages one by one. Lin Yun had read quite quickly, and it only took him half an hour to read Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm, and sure enough, it was full of mistakes. Lin Yun read through it once and found at least 20 major errors, unimaginable for a magic book. After all, magic was a strict art, and any mistake would lead to an entirely different result. For 20 mistakes to go undiscovered, in all that Lin Yun had seen in his lifetime, only Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm was like this. Fortunately, Lin Yun wasn't interested in those mistakes, so he immediately disregarded them after noticing. The only thing Lin Yun was looking for was the way to build the magic array. Amusingly enough, the book's only valuable information was the one thing the author spent the whole book ridiculing and exhorting the readers not to do. Some of his words were even very rude, saying that the great mages that built this discarded rune would have very limited accomplishments in their lifetimes. Unfortunately, this author wasn't aware that 10,000 years later, the research on magic conducting runes would slowly mature, and after a complete system was set up, the discarded rune he spoke of would start to shine and be referred to as one of the most powerful runes, even giving great mages the ability to contend against high mages. But now, the magic array was truly called the discarded rune. Because the research of magic runes was too poor in this era, it was far from having grown enough, and many high mages and archmages would rely on their experiences to explain magic conducting runes to their disciples. The magic conducting runes they talked about each existed on their own, and although there were some relations drawn between them, they were unable to form a complete system. In this situation, the magic array was truly no different from being a discarded rune. In order to display the might of the magic array, one needed at least 6 magic conducting runes. With the magic array at the core of these 6 magic conducting runes, a great mage would be able to contend against a high mage. There was no need for external power, as one's mana itself would be enough to surpass the limitations of a rank and directly match up against a high mage. Because it was like that, the magic array was known as one of the most powerful magic conducting runes. And what Lin Yun wanted to build right now was exactly this magic array system. Lin Yun took out his own magic book and copied every line of the complete magic array, line after line. After he was done, Lin Yun put down his quill and closed Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm as he was digesting the knowledge it contained. Half an hour later, Lin Yun opened the other book. The other book was called Explanations of the Max Formula. This book came from the end of the 3rd dynasty. Although from the name, it seemed to have been written by the archmage known as the Flame Tyrant. In reality, this book had been written by one of his disciples. From the point of view of a disciple, he analyzed Max's entire magic system and conducted a large amount of battle analysis. It could be said that the analysis of this archmage's fire magic was thorough to the extreme. This book was quite popular in this era, as many great mages and high mages hoped to be able to gain insight from the Flame Tyrant's magic system. It was also the case for Lin Yun. For Lin Yun, Explanations of the Max Formula could be said to be one of the rare good books of this era. In that spacious, decaying library, Lin Yun had seen many books mentioning this book, but he hadn't had the chance to see it in person until he found about it from the management of the Sage Tower's library. Naturally, what Lin Yun wanted wasn't insight on control over fire magic. There were many such opportunities in the decaying library. Max was the name of the Flame Tyrant, who was only an archmage. In the decaying library, many books had been left by heaven mages or mages above even that rank. What Lin Yin really wanted was among the fight descriptions. If Lin Yin wasn't wrong, Flame Tyrant Max was born near Ghost City, which was known as the paradise of the undead. That place was even more frightening than the Bone Plane. Although the undead of the Bone Plane might rampage around, the strongest one was only a bone dragon. But Ghost City wasn't inferior to the Bone Plane. The Century Undead Tide was a great disaster that all of No Scent faced. Max was born in such a place, so it was inevitable that he would spend his life fighting the undead. Because of this, he was able to get high accomplishment in fire magic. Apart from holy magic, what the undead feared the most were flames. Lin Yin wanted to read the descriptions of Max's battles against the undead, and it would be even better if he had fought a bone devil when he was young. He was turning through the pages far slower than he had been when he browsed Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm. As Lin Yin would soon enter the Bone Plane, every battle that Max fought against the undead was worthy of his attention, even if they weren't bone devils. Nothing guaranteed that after Lin Yin put an end to the bone devils and occupied the Nether Iron Vein, he wouldn't come across other kinds of undead. While Lin Yin was conscientiously browsing through explanations of the Max formula, Solon suddenly looked toward the entrance of a library as a shadow flashed past. After some time, someone beckoned to him from the entrance. Solon suddenly shook, as that person was clearly Solomon. Why would an esteemed high mage act like a thief? Solon came out of the library, filled with questions. When he arrived at the door, he was pulled aside by Solomon, who asked, "Is that person reading Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm? At it novel been at?" "Yes." "What's wrong?" Solon felt a bit strange. Someone reading Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm shouldn't gather so much attention from a high mage. "It's not important." "Don't mind it. You leave first." Seeing that Solon wanted to ask a question, Solomon hurriedly waved his hand and drove his only disciple away. How could he tell his disciple that he had only come to the library to find out the young mage's opinion on Magic Conducting Rune Creation Paradigm? He wouldn't be able to keep his prestige as a teacher if he did. This seemed very ridiculous. An esteemed high mage coming to the library while sneaking like a thief to try to find out what a young mage thought of a particular book. If this spread out, who would believe it? But the problem was that it really was the case. Recently, the mages of the kingdom had been fervently discussing those 4 pieces of information that he had submitted. That information might likely prove the Fanruzen formula's mistakes. It was just that these mages still only knew that this information had come from the Mage Guild of Thousand Sails City, from the disciple of Star Sage Ji, Solomon. But Solomon knew that this had all come from a young mage named Mafa Merlin that was about 20 years old. He had been a failure of a magic apprentice that was unable to form his mana whirlpool a few months ago. But Solomon never said anything publicly. It wasn't because Solomon wanted to take credit for proving the mistakes of the Fanruzen formula, but rather because Solomon knew that even if he explained the truth, no one would believe it. The facts were too strange and ridiculous. If 10 people heard it, then all 10 of them would consider it a joke, let alone others. Even Solomon, who had experienced it himself, didn't dare to believe it. For this reason, he probed the young mage's breadth of knowledge during the Blackhorn auction. In the Sage Towers box, the two had a long discussion. At that time, Solomon didn't show anything on his face, but his mind was already in shock. Solomon had realized that this young mage was a person who could actually discuss magic with him on a deep level. Although Solomon took the initiative to bring up the topic, wanting to probe him by any means, the other side seemed to know what he was trying to do and would be careful not to overdo it. But he was able to reach the core of any topic with just a few sentences. Indeed, it was that kind of feeling. No matter how complicated or challenging the topic was, it felt as if that young mage only needed a few words to make it sound much more understated, to the point that it even made Solomon feel the misconception that the topics he chose were that simple. But once Solomon returned and thought carefully about it, he was startled. These weren't topics that could be casually understood and solved. Even he himself, as a respected high mage, would need a few years or perhaps even a dozen years to solve all of them. Yet that young mage was able to grasp the key points. Solomon remembered very clearly that when he asked some questions, that young mage seemed a bit absent-minded, but when he started talking, it hit the core of the matter. That felt like a kind of frightening instinct, a subconscious action. That discovery made Solomon feel a chill. Starting from that moment, Solomon truly believed that the answer to the Famruzen formula had come from this young mage, and wasn't just something he had overheard. Right now, it was the same library and the same young mage, along with a controversial millennium-old book. Solomon really wanted to know what that young mage thought of the magic conducting rune creation paradigm. Unfortunately, Solomon was disappointed. After making a copy of the method to build the magic array, Lin Yun put down magic conducting rune creation paradigm and started browsing through explanations of the max formula instead. This made it very awkward for Solomon, who had been waiting outside the door all this time. What should I do? Solomon waited for a long time, but Lin Yun never put down the second book to return to the first one. The high mage couldn't help but inwardly curse, irrationally blaming Lin Yun for deliberately going against him. Solomon was very clear about the contents of explanations of the max formula. It gave insights on the Flame Tyrant's fire magic, but there wasn't much special content, as it mostly consisted of some practical descriptions of his fights. Solomon had once described it as very entertaining. Normally, a very entertaining magic book like this shouldn't be read so earnestly, as there was little knowledge to actually glean from it. But this time, Lin Yun was being wronged. The reason Lin Yun could be so conscientious wasn't the Flame Tyrant's insights on fire magic control, as Lin Yun had already researched fire magic control quite thoroughly 10 years ago. Even if this Flame Tyrant was still alive, he would be utterly inferior to Lin Yun in theoretical knowledge. What Lin Yun was researching was the description of real battles. To be exact, the battles between the Flame Tyrant and the undead. After all, the one who wrote this book was the disciple of the Flame Tyrant. The battles that the Flame Tyrant had experienced have been experienced by the author. This kind of personal experience was most important to Lin Yun, especially the battle against the Bone Devil. Explanations of the max formula recorded a total of 2 fights against Bone Devils. In the first one, the Flame Tyrant had already advanced to High Mage and completely obliterated a dozen Bone Devils. The other one was when the Flame Tyrant was only a 5th-rank Great Mage and met a roaming Bone Devil outside Go City. It was a fierce battle that time. Usually, a Bone Devil's fighting strength was between level 15 to level 19, which was equivalent to a 5th to 9th-rank Great Mage. At that time, the author of the book had just started following the Flame Tyrant and had personally experienced that battle. According to his memories, the Bone Devil that the Flame Tyrant met that time was already approaching the level of a High Mage, but the Flame Tyrant used almost all his cards and ultimately faced the danger of a backlash by using a spiritual magic tool before finally managing to get rid of that Bone Devil. That fight was also one of the most dangerous fights of his whole life. Such a dangerous battle naturally left a profound impression in the mind of his follower, and the description of this battle was exceptionally detailed. What made Lin Yun pleasantly surprised was that this disciple ultimately mentioned that when the Flame Tyrant recalled that battle many years afterwards, he reflected upon it and listed a few mistakes he had made, and even claimed that if he hadn't made those mistakes, he might not have needed to use his spiritual magic tool at all. This self-reflection had a great significance to Lin Yun. This was equivalent to pointing out a clear road for Lin Yun so that he could challenge an extremely powerful Bone Devil once he was a 5th-rank Great Mage. Thus, Lin Yun was focused on his book and didn't notice Solomon standing outside the door. While Lin Yun read explanations of the max formula, in the Sage Tower, the Gilded Rose called together an alchemy exhibition. The contents of that exhibition included 4 excellent magic tools, 2 magic weapons, as well as alchemy puppet dedicated for mining called Miner. But the focus was on the so-called Hope Potions. Indeed, the Hope Potions that could easily make a magic apprentice reach the 9th rank. Along with the appearance of the Hope Potion, This small-scale alchemy exhibition immediately caused a stir in the entire thousand-sail city. And due to this exhibition, the name of the Gilded Rose was remembered by countless people. Many people found out that after Loch Merlin died, the flashing gold chamber of commerce didn't disappear. They still had an alchemy shop in the victorious Return Street called the Gilded Rose. The magical potion that allowed magic apprentices to easily reach the 9th rank was developed by the Gilded Rose. After finishing all this, the old butler smiled as he priced the hope potion at 200,000 gold, while also asserting that he only had one potion in hand. After the sale, the next bottle would appear 1 month later. Such a price would stop ordinary magic apprentices with no background and no savings from getting a chance to buy it, as 200,000 gold was a truly astronomical sum to them. But apart from these ordinary magic apprentices, Thousand Sail City still had many more unusual ones. There was no lack of children from the leaders of major forces, and neither was there any lack of children that were born in well-off merchant families. Such a price wasn't a big deal to them. Their only worry would be that they didn't buy it fast enough. In fact, not even 3 minutes after the end of the alchemy exhibition, the bottle of hope potion already had a new owner. The lucky guy was a 3rd-rank magic apprentice called Cruz. Cruz was 28 years old and had neither an illustrious background nor an outstanding gift. This in itself made it very difficult for him to become a mage. His only fortune was that he was also a pretty decent apprentice alchemist. Ever since he became an apprentice alchemist, Cruz had been working with major alchemy shops as a part-timer for various alchemists. He had saved a lot in the past 10 years, yet he hadn't saved too much, only around 200,000 gold. Originally, Cruz had come to the Gilded Rose today in order to buy a few magic scrolls, but he hadn't expected that he would chance upon the Gilded Rose's alchemy exhibition and get one of the first seats. Thus, that hope potion fell into Cruz's hands. That lucky 3rd-rank magic apprentice used his shivering hands to open the hope potion and slowly drink it before countless eyes. Then the miracle happened. The mana within Cruz instantly began to grow at a crazy pace. 4th rank, 5th rank, 6th rank, all the way until he had the power of a 9th-rank magic apprentice. In a matter of about half an hour, Cruz attained the power of a peak 9th-rank magic apprentice from the early 3rd rank. He almost reached the level of mana whirlpool condensation. This all happened under countless staring gazes. Over 100 onlookers saw this scene with their own eyes, and the instant Cruz reached the 9th rank, the entire Gilded Rose shook. The magic apprentices that had still doubted the offerings of the alchemy exhibition were now striving to be first to ask questions about the hope potion. Among them were those who were born with illustrious backgrounds who were offering twice or thrice the asking price to obtain a bottle of hope potion now. To them, there was no problem that couldn't be solved with gold. Unfortunately, gold couldn't settle their problem right now, because the old butler was very clear the hope potion was out of stock this month, and if they wanted to buy one, they would have to come early the next month. Thus, a group of magic apprentices who were yearning for the potion left the Gilded Rose with regrets and a bit of hope. Naturally, there were also those who didn't agree to leave. Most of these people were children of people with influence, scions of various forces' leaders. They were accustomed to using their parents' reputations to settle their problems. Since they couldn't buy the potion with money, they would naturally try to use their parents' names as usual, and among them, there were a few who were quite impatient and tried this immediately. They tried to get the Gilded Rose to supply hope potion to them first, or else, if Linian was there, he would have played with the guests a bit. Although the hope potion wasn't there, the glass bottle would definitely be enough, as it still had magical properties. Naturally, the old butler wouldn't be this cruel. After following Loch Merlin for so many years, how could he not know how to handle this matter? There's so many of you here, so who should be served first? How about you discuss it amongst yourselves? After saying such words, the old butler just walked away and left behind the 8 magic apprentices with outstanding backgrounds. A staring contest ensued, and no one was willing to give way for any of the others. Thus, they were in a deadlock for the whole afternoon. Nothing could be done about it. Who would give up on such an opportunity, getting the bottle of hope potion that would be available 1 month later? Even just a month's difference in the time it took to become a ninth-rank magic apprentice would be enough for the rest to fall behind. The few magic apprentices left were all born in major forces. Who would be willing to fall behind? As for the conclusion of this conflict, the old butler definitely didn't care about it. One bottle of hope potion a month was the sales schedule that he decided on after consulting Lin Yin. Because the two of them felt that, even compared to earning several million gold, the reputation of the Gilded Rose was more important. Selling all the hope potions at once could indeed let the Gilded Rose earn a few million gold in an instant. But the sensational effect wouldn't last long. After 3 months at most, the people would gradually forget about the hope potion and even gradually forget about the Gilded Rose if they had no further accomplishments. After all, the foundation of the Gilded Rose was too shallow. Compared to those alchemy shops that had operated for decades, whether it was its reputation or public opinion, they were both far inferior. The only advantage at the moment was the hope potion they possessed. Since this was the case, they would naturally promote the hope potion to its limit. 1 hope potion a month. At first glance, it seemed it would only bring in 200,000 gold each month, but the craze it would create would put the Gilded Rose at the center of discussions. Every time a hope potion was sold, it would lead to people chatting about it during their leisure time. When the craze about the potion started to cool down, the next hope potion would appear, and along with it, new stories and new topics to gossip about. And with the miraculous effect of the hope potion, how long would it take for the Gilded Rose to establish a good reputation in Thousand Sail City? To the Gilded Rose, this was worth a lot more than a few 100,000 gold. Along with the sale of the first bottle of hope potion and the rise of the 3rd-rank magic apprentice crews to 9th rank, the Gilded Rose caught the attention of the entire Thousand Sail City, including that of the Manchi family. The analysis of the volcano potion and the ghost potion was reaching its end. The 2 great alchemists from the Black Tower reported that the more technical problems had more or less been solved. Only a few issues were left, but they could be figured out given enough time. At that time, Manchi spent 4 million gold to purchase the 2 potions so that he could obtain alchemy support from the Black Tower. Now that the study of the 2 potions was reaching its end, it would be their turn to help the Manchi family. The 2 great alchemists had already freed themselves from their analytic work and begun fully helping with nurturing the Manchi family's alchemists. At the same time, the Manchi family's alchemy shops were making all kinds of preparations for their official openings. But at this time, the Gilded Rose suddenly had an alchemy exhibition and announced the hope potion that shocked the entire Thousand Sail City. To the numerous magic apprentices, this was a huge boon, but to the Manchi family, this was grievous news. After the contents of the alchemy exhibition spread out, Manchi had been restless. After thinking about it, he invited the 2 great alchemists from the Black Tower. This is impossible. The 2 great alchemists instantly cut Manchi off and denied the possibility of the existence of the hope potion. But as they saw Manchi's confused expression, the 2 great alchemists reined in their tempers and added a few explanatory sentences. According to them, a potion that could easily let a magic apprentice reach the 9th rank would need materials that could strengthen mana, because only such materials would be able to replace the normally required meditation and achieve the effect of completing the mana gathering in a short time. In the field of potioneering, a material that could strengthen mana wasn't something that 1 or 200,000 gold would be enough to make up for. A conservative estimate would be a production cost of a clean million, and the Gilded Rose was only selling it for 200,000 gold. How could it not be impossible? A scam. This is definitely a scam. Had it novel been at. Ultimately, the 2 great mages used a tone full of certainty to issue their verdict. Right then, just behind them, the Manchi family's butler, Jonathan, ran over while gasping. Master, the 9th rank magic apprentice is really at the 9th rank. Why are you panicking? After Manchi berated Jonathan, he smiled at the 2 great alchemists and sent them off. He then waited until the silhouettes of the 2 alchemists were far in the distance before his face turned completely dark. A manufacturing cost of 1 million gold? How could the Gilded Rose come out with that? Master, it's okay. I already understood. Manchi interrupted Jonathan and directly ordered him, "Go find me that magic apprentice." Ah! Jonathan froze. His first thought was that his master didn't believe him. So he hastily reasserted, "Master, that magic apprentice truly reached the 9th rank." I said I understood. Manchi's heart was already restless enough. He looked at Jonathan impatiently, feeling irritated as he raised his voice. "So what if he's a 9th rank magic apprentice? Could it be that you can't turn him back into a 3rd rank magic apprentice?" Yes, I understand." With this prompt from Manchi, Jonathan repeatedly nodded and awkwardly ran out of the study. After Jonathan was driven away, Manchi sat alone in the study for a while. Half an hour later, he had someone call Ryan. "Ryan, please go to the Alchemist Guild on my behalf and seek Granger. Tell him that our Chambers of Commerce Union found out that the sale of the Hope Potion of the Gilded Rose is a very serious fraudulent action and already caused a very nasty influence. Our Chambers of Commerce Union hopes that the Alchemist Guild will hold a hearing to find out the problem behind it. Also, conveniently tell him that our Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce has a batch of rare magic materials that will be shipped. If Great Alchemist Granger is interested, he can get a decent discount." "Yes, Father." As the only millennial force of Thousand Sail City, the Manchi family truly had a frightening amount of influence. 3 days after Ryan paid a visit to Granger, the Gilded Rose was notified that the Alchemist Guild would seize their goods. A small, middle-aged alchemist who was about 40 to 50 years old came to see them. He stood at the entrance of the Gilded Rose, looking up with a condescending expression on his face. This wasn't particularly aimed at the Gilded Rose. This was the normal attitude of a member of the Alchemist Guild. Those of the renowned Alchemist Guild tended to have this attitude toward all the alchemy shops of Thousand Sail City, including the one of the flashing gold chamber of commerce of the past. In their eyes, even if these alchemy shops appeared impressive, they were only puppets of the Alchemist Guild. Without the Alchemist Guild's authorization, they couldn't even recruit one decent alchemist because the Alchemist Guild had control over the entire industry. The survival of these alchemy shops could be decided by a mere word from the Alchemist Guild, just like this Gilded Rose. The Hope Potion unveiled a few days ago had put the Gilded Rose in the limelight, but now, with just a word from the Alchemist Guild, it was suddenly faced with the danger of having their goods seized. "Alchemist Mullen, what is this?" Lin Yun had been at the Sage Tower for the past few days, so only the old butler was left in charge of the Gilded Rose. Hearing that someone from the Alchemist Guild had come to visit, he hurriedly went out to welcome him. But once he got to the lobby, the face of the old butler stiffened. 10 alchemists wearing black robes were sticking papers marked "seized" on goods that lined the shelves. Each time they stuck a paper on something, the alchemist taking the inventory would record it. And the one in charge of this was Alchemist Mullen, who the old butler had dealt with a few times. In the Alchemist Guild, Mullen was in charge of market supervision. When the Gilded Rose was reopening, the old butler specially paid a visit to this Mullen a few times so that the Alchemist Guild wouldn't make trouble for them. He even gave him a few generous bribes. At that time, Mullen patted his chest and guaranteed that the matters of the Gilded Rose would be his matters, and that if there was ever an issue, he would seek them out personally to resolve it before it became an official problem. The old butler never expected that a month later, Mullen, who had said those words so confidently, would be seizing the goods of the Gilded Rose. "Please wait, this must be a misunderstanding." After a quick glance around, the old butler knew that something had gone awry. Flustered, he hurriedly stopped the black-robed man from sticking more papers while requesting help from the person he had bribed. "Alchemist Mullen, can we have a few words? You can say what you want to say here." If it was before, Mullen might have still agreed to chat in private, because that would mean that he might potentially receive some more profits. But this time, Mullen didn't even consider it and immediately rejected it. The old butler suddenly understood how bad the situation was, but he still kept a smiling face. "Okay, Alchemist Mullen, can I ask why are the Gilded Rose's products being seized?" "Why is it being seized?" Mullen snorted. "Don't you yourself know about what the Gilded Rose did? Old Pave, your Gilded Rose is in big trouble this time. For the sake of our previous friendship, I advise you to not ask too much about it, and to quickly help my people take the goods before explaining everything in the upcoming hearing." Don't think that you'll be lucky. The problem with your gilded rose is very serious. Hearing, this is a decision from above. Finding someone to plead for you is useless. Molin rolled his eyes and then glanced at the progress of his subordinates. Deciding that it was too slow, he grabbed a few of the seals himself and stuck the papers on some of the goods while instructing his subordinates. These, and these, bring all these back for me. The only difference was that the goods that the black-robed alchemist had seized were goods that they had been told might be problematic, while the ones Molin seized were all the most expensive items of the Gilded Rose. Molin's favorite activity was closing down alchemy shops, because confiscating the stock of an alchemy shop would bring in a large amount of income. Even now, the few goods he chose were worth a few 100,000 golds. If he brought them back to the Alchemist Guild, they would be personally processed by Molin. And if some of the goods were damaged and had to be disposed of, that definitely couldn't be blamed on Molin. Alchemical goods were very frail, so it was normal for some damage to appear, right? Then again, who could look into that? The shuttered Gilded Rose? At such a time, they would have to worry about their hearing first. Molin quickly looked around the shelves. Every expensive item that fell into his gaze made his face expose a hint of excitement and greed. 1 item, 2 items, 3 items. In a short period of time, 8 expensive items had been seized by Molin, but he still was not yet satisfied. His eyes turned toward the staircase to the 2nd floor. Molin's intuition told him that the truly precious items were most likely in the alchemy laboratory. You, and you follow me up. Molin pointed at a few black-robed alchemists and walked over to the 2nd floor with them. But just as Molin stepped foot onto the staircase, a soft sound echoed through the air. Before Molin could understand what had happened, he was ruthlessly sent flying. Fortunately, he didn't go very high. Thus, he quickly fell down. However, he landed face first. Who is it? Molin got up from the ground with difficulty, his face in a bad state. It looked sort of like a peach, with red and white mixed together in a mess. Who dares to sneak attack me? Have the guts to show yourself. Molin then saw his attacker come out. He was a thin, 20-year-old mage with a pale complexion who was dressed in a brand new black robe. He stood there with his right hand still raised after having cast Tornado Whip. You are the one who attacked me? Although the Alchemist Guild had always been relatively low-key, unlike the powerful Mage Guild, whose might shook the entire thousand-sail city, it had the power to rule over the industry. The Alchemist Guild's members always had a feeling of superiority over everyone else, especially Molin, who was able to control the market. In Thousand Sail City, he could be described as harsh and unreasonable. Usually, the alchemy shops having their goods seized would have to sweet-talk Molin out of fear that they might be accused of some additional offense. But today, he was actually attacked with a tornado whip as he was about to inspect the alchemy laboratory. This was simply a humiliation. At it, Novel Benedette. I am Maffa Merlin. Linian didn't care about Molin's expression as he slowly walked out of the crowd and entered the lobby of the Gilded Rose, before stopping in front of the bloodied Molin. The Gilded Rose you are closing down just so happens to belong to me. Maffa Merlin? Molin was dazed. He then remembered that Loch Merlin indeed had a son named Maffa Merlin. But so what if it was Loch Merlin's son? Even if Loch Merlin himself had committed such an offense, he would have had to pay the price, let alone his son. You dared to do this to me? Molin stared at Lin Yun, his voice full of repressed anger. Do you know what you are doing? Do you know the consequences of interfering with the Alchemist Guild's market supervision? What consequences? Aha, you'll know about it after I bring you back. Molin waved his hand, and his black-robed subordinates quickly surrounded Lin Yun. Capture this individual and bring him back. To dare to sneak attack me, such nerve. Understood. Naturally, this group of alchemists wasn't weak, as they had been sent to seize expensive goods, which could cause conflict. They were all at least 5th-rank mages, and some of them had even reached the 9th rank. After hearing Molin's command, powerful mana fluctuations suddenly filled the Gilded Rose. How come it's so lively? But at this time, an aged voice came from within the crowd. The Alchemist Guild is carrying out official business. Unrelated people had better step back, Molin coldly sneered as his black robe subordinates got ready to capture Lin Yin. The Alchemist Guild seems quite high-handed. Go back and ask Liss if he dares to make me step back. Leader Liss' name isn't something that... Molin stopped mid-sentence. He suddenly felt that this aged voice was a bit familiar. Thinking of this, Molin couldn't help turning around. Then his face turned deathly pale. Fuck, Solomon. At that split second, Molin felt as if he had been struck by thunder, and his eyes filled with fear. He looked at Solomon like he saw a monster appear. The expression on his bloody face was a mix of shock, fear, and loss. Molin almost wanted to cry. For some time, Molin's mind was blank. One thought kept appearing over and over again. How could it be Solomon? This was Solomon, leader of the Mage Guild, master of the Sage Tower, the Solomon whose power shook Thousand Sail City for 20 years. Never mind a small alchemist like Molin. Even Leader Liss would be forced to remain respectful in front of this high mage. I just scolded Solomon. As he thought about it, Molin felt his legs weakening. What should I do? What should I do? This was the strongest mage of Thousand Sail City, someone who had slaughtered the Blackwing bandits. In front of him, Molin was a mere ant waiting to be crushed. Molin stood there with a pale complexion, and he couldn't help shivering as numerous droplets of cold sweat dripped down from his forehead. Merlin, do you need my help resolving this issue? Solomon didn't look at the terrified wreck as he entered the Gilded Rose without even asking what had happened. All he cared about was whether Lin Yin needed his help resolving this problem. That's right, resolving it. If someone else said something like this, it would definitely draw the ire of the Alchemist Guild. After all, who would dare to stop the Alchemist Guild from seizing goods when they were in charge of this market? Wouldn't that be disrespecting the Alchemist Guild? But it was a totally different situation if Solomon was the one saying it. The black-robed alchemists, along with the shivering Molin, didn't feel anything wrong with Solomon saying something like this. If Solomon said he would resolve it, then no matter who was right and who was wrong, no matter the cause and effect, the matter would be resolved. Had it novel been at? This was the extent of Solomon's status in Thousand Sail City. Lin Yin knew that as long as Solomon said something, these black-robed alchemists and Molin would definitely fix everything and scamper back to the Alchemist Guild with gloomy expressions. What seizing, what hearing? They would be unrelated to Lin Yin. But after Lin Yin thought about it, he shook his head and rejected Solomon's kindness. No need. It wasn't because of some ridiculous pride, and it also wasn't because of some baffling honor. In fact, due to his previous life, Lin Yin's pride and honor, as well as his moral principles, could be considered to be quite flexible depending on the situation. He refused Solomon's kindness because he felt that the Gilded Rose still had too few alchemists. Mage Solomon, I already explained the matters of magic conducting rune creation paradigm on the road. In a few days, I'll come to the Sage Tower. I'll ask you for some pointers at that time. Very well. Solomon understood Lin Yin's intentions and didn't try to convince him. After nodding, he gazed at Molin once again and muttered, "Give my respects to Liss." After saying this, he turned around and left the Gilded Rose. Yes. Molin was finally able to let out a sigh of relief. His legs went soft, and he sat down on the staircase, but he couldn't relish in the feeling of being let off easy. He wiped the sweat off his forehead, but didn't even take the time to properly wipe the dust off his face as he rushed toward Lin Yin. However, Molin didn't act all high and mighty this time. An obsequious expression was now plastered on his face as the stuttered, Mage Merlin, it's a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding. Haha, it's good if it's all just a misunderstanding. Lin Yin laughed as if the previous unpleasantness had never happened. He even kindly reminded, Alchemist Molin, there still seem to be a few shelves that are lacking seals over there. No, it's not needed. There is no need to put seals there. By now, Molin's smile looked more like unsightly weeping. Damn, if I had known that you were friendly with Solomon, how could I be willing to seize your goods? I got no benefits in the end and got on the bad side of Solomon. How could I be so unlucky? No need, really? There's truly no need, Molin miserably forced out. Good then. Lin Yin nodded in relief at this, before suddenly asking, Oh, right, Alchemist Molin, when does the hearing begin? The hearing is in an hour. No, no, no. I don't mean to urge you, Mage Merlin, if you don't have the time, the hearing could be. Just after he started talking, Mullen felt like slapping himself. Wasn't this a bad idea? He had just managed to gloss over the attempted seizure of goods, yet he was still talking about the hearing. What if Solomon returned? No, no, I have plenty of time. It would take 30 minutes to get from here to the Alchemist Guild. Alchemist Mullen, hurry up and seal everything. Mullen let out two surprised murmurs one after the other as he was completely stunned. After working for the Alchemist Guild for so many years, it was the first time Mullen saw an alchemy shop owner like this person. Not only was he impatient to participate in the hearing, but he was even urging him to hurry and seal everything. What? What is happening? Are you losing your mind? Or am I? One was continuously urging while the other wanted to just stop. The sealing work was rushed ahead. Mullen commanded a few of the black-robed alchemists to hurriedly put seals on a few shelves before saying, while shivering, that the sealing had already been completed. The most frightening thing was that before he left, Lin Yun asked one thing. All right, Alchemist Mullen, once the hearing is over, will I be missing some of my things? Definitely not. Mullen was on the verge of crying. He shook his head while guaranteeing, that definitely will not happen. At the start, Mullen truly had planned to get some benefits out of this. After all, by the time the hearing was over, it wasn't even certain whether the Gilded Rose could continue doing business. Under these kinds of circumstances, no one would come to give him trouble over taking a few things for himself. But now, even if Mullen was bold, he wouldn't dare to make a move on Lin Yun. The young boss of the Gilded Rose was actually someone that could chat casually with Solomon. The only thing he would gain from acting against someone like this would be some enmity. Besides, with Solomon leaving behind that sentence, even leaderless would have no choice but to show a bit of respect and only go through the motions of having the hearing. Once finished, the Gilded Rose should be able to do business again. What if Solomon personally came out if he stole something? Thinking that this might be possible, Mullen's legs felt weak once again. Unfortunately, Lin Yun didn't say anything on the way to break up the awkward atmosphere, and the two spent their time in the carriage to the Alchemist Guild in complete silence. Looking at the time, 1 hour had passed. The hearing was held on the second floor. Mullen respectfully led Lin Yun to the door and knocked on the door before announcing, "The Gilded Rose's Maffa Merlin has arrived. Please come in." Mullen opened the door and led Merlin inside. This was a spacious conference room with very simple furnishing. There were a few chairs and a long table, and behind the long table were 3 middle-aged men sitting side by side. They didn't seem very old, each perhaps between 40 and 50. 10 meters in front of the table was a chair that apparently was left there for Lin Yun. "Mage Merlin, please sit." After Mullen led Lin Yun to the conference room, he respectfully asked Lin Yun to sit down before running toward one of the middle-aged men to whisper a few sentences in his ears. After hearing Mullen's words, the middle-aged man was clearly startled. He instantly glanced at Lin Yun in bewilderment before quickly lowering his head to cover his lack of self-control. However, the broken quill in his right hand still betrayed his mood. It was only a quill, but he couldn't hold it stable. Although they were 10 meters away and Mullen's voice was very low, Lin Yun could make out from Mullen's lips that he said, Solomon himself accompanied him back. It seemed that this middle-aged man was Mullen's backer in the Alchemist Guild. After Mullen withdrew from the conference room, the hearing officially began. "You are Maffa Merlin?" The first to ask the question was a middle-aged man that looked roughly 50 years old. The mana fluctuations from his body gave Lin Yun some pressure. If it had been before his advancement to Great Mage, Lin Yun might have only felt pressure and nothing more, but now his awareness toward mana fluctuations had greatly sharpened. With a glance, he could see that this middle-aged person should be a 5th-rank Great Mage. But after reaching the rank of Great Mage, he might have taken a few detours, making his magic conducting runes no longer able to maintain balance. For him to be able to even reach this step was thanks to the help of various alchemy potions. But he would be stuck at the 5th rank for life. Maffa Merlin? Not hearing any sort of response, the man frowned. As someone who was relatively higher in the ranks of the Alchemist Guild, although the number of hearings he had taken part in hadn't reached the triple digits yet, he still had participated in more than 80. In all of these, he had never seen one where the person being questioned would ignore him. Moreover, there were two of his peers watching on the side, making him feel like he had been disrespected. Naturally, he didn't have a good first impression of Lin Yun. Ah, yes, I am off of Merlin. Lin Yun, who had felt sorry for the other side for being stuck at the 5th rank, came back to his senses after hearing the middle-aged man prompt him a second time. Good, Mafa Merlin, you can now confess about the issue regarding your gilded rose. What do you mean, confess? Lin Yun kept up a dazed expression, but he clearly understood that this overbearing middle-aged man was trying to intimidate him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought it up like this. Sure enough, as Lin Yun thought, the middle-aged man impatiently continued. Could there be problems with the gilded rose, which is under your name, that even you yourself don't know about? And you ask me what I mean about confessing? I'm telling you, Mafa Merlin, you had better cooperate and answer this question truthfully. The severity of your punishment depends on your attitude. Don't be stubborn. That wouldn't be good for you and the gilded rose. This man had held many hearings, so he was quite used to handling these owners of alchemy shops. The most effective tactic was intimidation. These ruthless merchants might look like they abided by the law, but in reality, who hadn't made a few illegal deals. Most hearings were about that. As long as they were intimidated, these merchants would truthfully confess. Even things that the guild was unaware of would come out sometimes. This middle-aged man was highly experienced. Unfortunately, he was facing the Gilded Rose this time. The Gilded Rose rose up from scratch, and more than 90% of the products had been personally made by Lin Yun. How could Lin Yun not know if there was a problem with them? Thus, Lin Yun pushed back. Then say it. What issue is there with the Gilded Rose? The middle-aged man's face hardened as he thought to himself. He is too arrogant, too savage. He refuses to confess to the problem, and even ridiculed me, the host of the hearing, an esteemed alchemist of the Alchemist Guild. The middle-aged man stood up and pointed at Lin Yun as he warned, Mafa Merlin, you should know where you are. This is the Alchemist Guild, not a place where you can behave as you wish. You'd better confess truthfully, or else. Are you threatening me? Although Lin Yun was still smiling, his eyes faintly narrowed as he stared back at the middle-aged man. Mage Merlin, it is a mere formality. We aren't threatening you. Seeing the two of them glaring daggers at each other, one of the other men hurriedly joined the discussion. After appeasing Lin Yun, he patted the shoulder of his ashen-faced colleague. Okay, Granger, let me do the questioning. Had it novel been at? Granger ruthlessly stared at Lin Yun for a few more moments and then sat down after snorting. Mage Merlin, let me introduce myself first. I am called Baysoro. I am in charge of this hearing with Granger. We called you here to ask a few questions. Sure, ask away. First, I would like to ask of you, when the Gilded Rose had an alchemy exhibition yesterday, at 10 in the morning, did the exhibition include a potion named the Hope Potion, which is rumored to be able to make a magic apprentice easily reach 9th rank? Yes. Good. Second question. Was this potion bought by a 3rd rank magic apprentice named Cruz for the price of 200,000 gold? Yes. And the last question, can Mage Merlin confirm whether this potion can make a magic apprentice easily reach 9th rank, as it was explained by the Gilded Rose, and without any side effect? Yes. Good. I have no more questions. Baysoro nodded and only wrote something on a paper in front of him. Mafa Merlin, I have to say that this is a very substandard scam. Granger stood up once again and looked at Lin Yun as if he was looking at an idiot as he continued, I don't know what achievements you have in magic, but honestly, you've really failed in the alchemy field. When you plotted this trap, didn't you think with basic common sense? After saying that, Granger picked up a book from the table and threw it in front of Lin Yun. If Granger's previous actions could be considered intimidation, then this action was certainly an attempt to humiliate him. Lin Yun naturally couldn't go and pick it up. That would be even worse than picking up soap in a shared shower. Lin Yun only glanced down and saw that this book was called History of Alchemy's Growth. Lin Yun saw it once in the Sage Tower. There was nearly no alchemy-related knowledge inside. It mainly talked about some important characters and events in the history of alchemy. You see, Knowledge is under your foot, but you're even unwilling to bend your waist to retrieve it. A sneer appeared on Granger's face. He felt as if he had the upper hand. If you had been willing to look at this book, you wouldn't have left so many loopholes in your scam. On the 13th page, it is clearly written that through several millennia of alchemy history, there have been 17 types of potions that were able to make a magic apprentice smoothly reach 9th rank. Each of them is an artwork that could be recorded in the annals of history. The cheapest one among them was worth 1,500,000 gold, while your Gilded Rose sold the so-called Hope Potion for barely a tenth of that. I don't know whether to call you stupid or naive. Was your Gilded Rose always so charitable? Then how much should we price it at? Its price should be. Granger reflexively said half of his sentence before having a sudden realization and changing his tact. How much you should sell it for doesn't matter. The main point is that your Gilded Roses scam has already brought about serious consequences. What consequences? What consequences? Haha, you will understand soon. Granger gave Lin Yin a cold glare before calling for a staff member. After whispering a few words to that person, the latter quickly left the reception room. 10 minutes later, the staff member came back with a young magic apprentice in his late 20s. Now, let me introduce this person. He is Magic Apprentice Cruz, the one who bought the Hope Potion for 200,000 gold. Magic Apprentice Cruz, could you please share what happened to you after you drank the Hope Potion? Yes, this magic apprentice called Cruz clearly hadn't experienced any big events before. Standing in front of several great mages and great alchemists, he couldn't help acting rather nervous. His eyes faintly flickered as he recalled. On that day, I originally planned on purchasing a few magic scrolls, but I didn't expect the Gilded Rose to organize an alchemy exhibition. I just happened to be at the first row. At that time, I thought that a large alchemy shop like the Gilded Rose wouldn't scam people, and I felt lucky. I wanted to immediately become a 9th rank magic apprentice, so I bought it. I spent all my savings to buy that damned Hope Potion. And afterwards, they urged me to drink it on the spot. I did as instructed, and after drinking it, I truly felt my mana quickly increasing from 3rd rank to 4th rank, from 4th rank to 5th rank, before finally stopping at the 9th rank. At that time, I really thought that I was lucky. Many people congratulated me, and many more people were asking when there would be Hope Potion in stock. But in the end, after I came back, I hurriedly entered meditation in order to consolidate the level of mana. At that time, I discovered that I couldn't undergo meditation, and moreover, that the previous surge of mana was quickly vanishing. I quickly fell from 9th rank to 8th rank, then from 8th rank to 7th rank. The more the young magic apprentice talked, the more his emotions came out before finally he became unable to control himself. This morning, I couldn't even maintain my status of 3rd rank magic apprentice. Mafa Merlin, you scoundrel, you destroyed my life. I won't let you off. Calm down, Magic Apprentice Cruz. Yes. I originally was a 3rd rank magic apprentice, but look, I can't even maintain 3rd rank right now. Moreover, I still can't undergo meditation. Maybe tomorrow, I might become an ordinary person devoid of mana. This was caused by the damn Gilded Rose. After saying that, the young magic apprentice even let out a few tears. Mafa Merlin, those are the consequences of your actions, Granger sneered while looking at Linyan. Magic Apprentice Cruz, can I trouble you to come over? You are too far. I can't see clearly. Linyan didn't pay attention to Granger's malicious accusations and simply beckoned Cruz over. It's fine, Magic Apprentice Cruz. Let him have a look at what the Gilded Rose did. This is the Alchemist Guild. No one will harm you. Understood. After obtaining Granger's guarantee, the young magic apprentice walked over. Linyan looked at the young magic apprentice for a long time. Mana is indeed dissipating. If this keeps going, let alone tomorrow, you might become an ordinary person today. Lin Yun's voice sounded sympathetic as he asked, "Oh right, Magic Apprentice Cruz, what does a dissipation potion taste like?" What dissipation potion? The originally cowering magic apprentice almost jumped up when he heard the words dissipation potion. He looked like a cat whose tail had been stepped on as he yowled. Mage Merlin, what does this mean? Upon hearing these words, let alone the young magic apprentice, even Baysoro, who had been immersed in his writing, began to frown. As a great alchemist, how could he not know what a dissipation potion was? It was a poison tailored for mages. Once poisoned, the victim's usable mana would decrease very rapidly. A lot of rogues like to douse their daggers in dissipation potion, so that when fighting a mage, a small injury could change the outcome of the battle. But a mage drinking a dissipation potion? This had never been heard of. Sour, I presume? Lin Yun squinted as he kept watching that young magic apprentice, apparently not hearing Basoro's question. You are talking nonsense. Under Lin Yun's intense gaze, the young magic apprentice was even more nervous. What dissipation potion? I never heard about it. What proof do you have? Proof. Lin Yun didn't move from his seat as he mused with a lazy voice. However, just as his words ended, a whoosh could be heard. It was followed by a splash of blood. Before anyone realized what had happened, Lin Yun had already taken out a glass bottle, and the spurt of blood entered the bottle without a single drop being spilled. The entire process was so fast that everyone was left in a daze for a moment. When Cruz clutched his right hand while letting out a miserable shriek, everyone understood what had happened. Fresh blood could be seen dripping from the young magic apprentice's wrist, and the sound from before had come from a quickly cast windblade. In other words, he had cut open the young magic apprentice's wrist and collected the blood coming out in a glass bottle. And he had done it so quickly that no one was able to follow the action. What did this mean? The three people sitting on the other side of the table couldn't treat this lightly. Among the three of them, Granger was a 5th-rank Great Mage, Baysoro was a 6th-rank Great Mage, and the remaining one was someone who had only recently become a Great Mage. But even so, these 3 Great Mages were all in a daze and weren't able to clearly understand how it had happened. How did this Mage Merlin release that windblade? How did he cut Cruz? And how did he collect the blood in the glass bottle? They weren't able to see it, and that realization shocked them. That casting speed was far too frightening. What would have happened if the target of that wind blade wasn't Cruz's wrist, but rather the neck of one of the 3 Great Mages? As the thought passed through his mind, Granger suddenly felt uncomfortable sitting in his chair. After all, ever since that young mage entered the reception room, Granger had deliberately been making things hard for him. This was partly because it was a necessary part of conducting the hearing, but it was also due to Granger's selfishness. Others might not know the reason, but how could Granger not know? The eldest son of the Monchi family, Ryan, had personally visited him and promised numerous precious magic materials. All he needed to do was to make things difficult for that Maffa Merlin guy during the hearing. Granger had unhesitantly agreed. As he saw it, Maffa Merlin was but a 20-year-old mage whose biggest backer had already passed away. He was now operating an alchemy shop with a very old butler. He had no influence and no background. So what if he embarrassed him in the hearing? Would such a person dare to retaliate? Retaliating against a great alchemist. Even if he was bold, he wouldn't dare. And in a hypothetical case that he dared to do so, would he even have the ability? A youth who had just advanced to become a mage retaliating against a 5th-rank Great Mage. Such a joke. Thus, from the beginning, Granger had been thinking of every possible way to make it hard for this young mage, while each of his words had an intimidating tone and each of his questions carried deep malice. But now, Granger felt a little bit nervous. He had suddenly found out that the young mage he had been trying to intimidate was a huge threat. He had cast a spell that harmed their witness, and none of the great mages had been able to stop him, or even react at all. This casting speed was too frightening. Granger went pale as he thought about the fact he had been antagonizing such a frightening person. Merlin, Mage Merlin. What does it mean? Nothing much. It's just that, didn't Magic Apprentice Cruz just say that I didn't have any proof? Lin Yun gently shook the glass bottle in his hand while calmly explaining, I felt that this was a provocation, and thus I decided to produce some proof. What is that proof? The proof. Lin Yun smiled and stood up, shaking the glass bottle while walking toward the table. What are you doing? Granger immediately jumped up in surprise. But after he cried out in alarm, the great alchemist realized that he had forgotten to act with decorum, and promptly spoke further to cover it up. "You can show your proof. You don't need to come up here to do so." "Great alchemist Granger, I'm only bringing the proof to you. You don't need to be so nervous." "I am not nervous." How could Granger admit something like that? Fortunately, Lin Yun didn't press the matter. He only put the glass bottle on the table and explained, "This is the proof." "What kind of proof is that?" Granger was confused. No, it wasn't just Granger. Although the other two great alchemists didn't say anything, when they looked at Lin Yun, they couldn't help frowning. What kind of proof could there be in this bottle containing a bit of blood? Lin Yun quickly gave them the answer. "Great alchemist Granger, your knowledge is truly lacking." Lin Yun pointed at the history of alchemy's growth on the floor while saying with a smile, "If you were to carefully read this book, you would find in the third paragraph of page 27 that ruler Zhang Tue had been stabbed with a weapon doused in dissipation potion in his later years, leading to all kinds of symptoms. If I'm not wrong, it was mentioned that it took 3 months for ruler Zhang Tue's wound to heal, and the flow of blood was never-ending." Granger's expression was unsightly. What he had just used to make fun of Lin Yun was now being used against him, and he couldn't say anything against it because the description was too crucial. For some time, Granger stared attentively at the book on the ground, but he could neither pick it up nor leave it there. If he picked it up, that was the same as losing his reputation because of his earlier words, but if he didn't pick it up, how could he refute the claim? "You see, great alchemist Granger, soap, air, knowledge is at your feet, but you are unwilling to bend your waist to pick it up." The most terrible part was Lin Yun sneering. For some time, Granger really felt like slapping himself. "How about you look inside to check, Granger?" Baisaro, who was feeling a bit intrigued, couldn't help but advise him to continue. Granger turned to glance at Baisaro, and although he didn't say anything, he had already cursed 18 generations of Baisoro's ancestors. "Fuck, you are a bastard. I'm already in this situation, but not only are you refusing to support me, you're even throwing stones at me. If you want to take a look, how about you go pick it up and check yourself?" The hearing has to continue. Baisaro clearly knew with a glance that Granger wasn't thinking anything good about him right now, so after a short time, he simply lowered his head and gave this reason. But to Granger, having this reason was a way out of the embarrassing situation. Thus, after hesitating for a long time, the great alchemist clenched his teeth and picked up History of Alchemy's Growth. When he looked inside, he wanted to find a hole where he could hide. After flipping through some pages, he saw that on the third paragraph of page 27, it was indeed written that ruler Zhang Te of the Third Dynasty had spent 3 months recovering from his wound, and that it had bled profusely. Everything was as Maffa Merlin had said. Granger suddenly realized that the path that this hearing was heading down was far from good for him. He stood still for a while, staring at the words before him. Had it novel been at? Sure enough, after Granger checked the relevant passage from the book, Lin Yun held the glass bottle up and gently shook it. Why was the wound continuously bleeding? Take a look at the drops of blood. It has been 10 minutes since I cut Magic Apprentice Cruz's wrist, yet these drops of blood still show no signs of coagulating. This blood simply cannot coagulate. Great alchemist Granger, you wouldn't tell me that it is but a mere coincidence. This is only your conjecture. This can't be used as evidence. Granger felt that he could still salvage the situation. This isn't a mere conjecture. Lin Yun didn't plan to give him the slightest opportunity. He picked up a quill and a piece of paper on the table and started writing. He wrote down an alchemy formula containing 4 lines. There, compound this potion, and you can extract at least a drop of dissipation potion from this blood sample here in 3 minutes. At that time, if great alchemist Granger is still not convinced, he could try it himself. Baisaro once again hit Granger while he was down. He proceeded to compound the potion according to Lin Yun's formula. Granger looked at the potion and felt like crying. Seriously, how could you move so fast and finish compounding in a few minutes? Do you think I'm not miserable enough? Granger's thoughts were about right. Baisaro didn't stop after taking out the finished potion and volunteered to help Lin Yun with the refining. Under the exquisite work of the great alchemist, the blood inside the glass bottle quickly separated, leaving a few drops of transparent liquid behind. As it was decanted into another glass bottle, a sour smell assaulted their noses. "Granger, look at this!" After Baesoro was done with his work, he took a deep breath before showing an embarrassed expression. After a moment of silence, Granger almost jumped up. "Fuck! Why are you looking at me with such an awkward expression? You aren't thinking of truly making me try it, right? We are both members of the Alchemist Guild. Why are you acting like that?" "What? What do you think you are doing?" Granger almost subconsciously covered his mouth. He looked at Baesoro with vigilance. Baesoro saw Granger's expression, but he still didn't know what his colleague was thinking. That idiot, Baesoro inwardly scolded him. This person was also a fellow great alchemist. Baesoro was looking at him with disdain, as his actions were too unsightly. In order to make some profits, he had gone so far as to maliciously accuse this young mage at the hearing. What he did was clear, yet he thought that others couldn't see. If it had happened to someone else, Baesoro likely wouldn't have bothered about it. To a great alchemist, the survival of a random alchemy shop was only a trivial matter. Offending a colleague for a trivial matter wasn't worth it in Baesoro's eyes. The problem was he couldn't ignore Lin Yun's matters. What Molin had said earlier was very clear. When that young mage came back to the Gilded Rose, he had been escorted back by Solomon. What did that mean? Is a person that Solomon personally escorted someone you can offend, Granger? Granger could be considered lucky that Windblade earlier had only cut Cruz's wrist. If Mage Merlin had a worse temper, that Windblade might have fallen on your neck due to your previous behavior. It would be too late for you to regret it then. Regardless of your fate, don't implicate me. I don't want to clean up your mess. As he thought this, Baesoro felt a little troubled. The hand holding the glass bottle seemed to be moving toward Granger. "Get that away from me!" Granger quickly cried out. Baesoro took a look at Granger and then opened the glass bottle before giving his opinion. "It seems like it truly is dissipating potion." But he still ended up asking, "Granger, what do you think?" Granger opened his mouth, but he didn't know what he should say. Granger was too embarrassed by the situation. Could he agree to what Baesoro said? Then today's hearing might turn into the biggest joke of the Alchemist Guild, and the most laughable person would definitely be Granger himself. But if he didn't agree, what could he do about the bottle Baesoro was holding? Would he really have to try it? And what if it really was dissipating potion? Granger remained confused and indecisive for a long time before finally realizing something. So what if it's a Manchi family? So what if they offer magic materials? To hell with it. If I can't protect myself, why should I care about your trivial matter? People were like this. They would put themselves first when facing adversity. That's right, I also feel that this is dissipation potion. Granger's mind cleared up, and he immediately figured out his course of action. He slowly took the bottle and walked to the young man that had been brought in as a witness. "Magic Apprentice Cruz, what do you have to say?" Cruz was in a daze. The situation had changed too suddenly. First, a wind blade cut his wrist, leaving these great alchemists speechless. And even worse, this particular great alchemist changed sides and was now grilling him instead. How could this happen? Cruz originally wasn't someone with much social experience. Among the people he usually came in contact with, the most influential ones were only alchemists. Cruz had never even dreamed of being in the same room as three great alchemists. And now he was being questioned by a great alchemist. Cruz stood there lifelessly, cold sweat dripping from his forehead. How could this be? Didn't the butler of the Manchi family guarantee that I wouldn't be exposed, and that if anything went wrong, great alchemist Granger would definitely help me? What kind of help is this? I agree with great alchemist Baesoro. This substance that was extracted from your blood is dissipation potion. In other words, Magic Apprentice Cruz, you're presented false testimony in this hearing. Therefore, after discussing with great alchemist Baesoro, we have decided to end this hearing here. The Gilded Rose can start conducting business again. As for you, Magic Apprentice Cruz, there will be an investigation in a little while. I hope you will cooperate. Finished. I'm finished, After Granger was done talking, the young magic apprentice immediately felt everything darkening before him. The conditions the Monchi family had agreed to would all disappear. He would have to deal with the consequences of the dissipation potion on his own. And the most frightening thing was that the Alchemist Guild was even going to investigate him. Once that happened, the false testimony he had given in this hearing would come up. He would never be able to find work in Thousand Sail City later on. It shouldn't have happened like this. When he left the Gilded Rose the other day, he had already been a 9th-rank magic apprentice. As long as he worked hard, he might have been able to become a mage. A beautiful future was beckoning to him. Why did I accept Jonathan's offer? Why did I drink that dissipation potion? Cruz stood there in a daze. He wanted to say a few sentences to justify himself, but his words were barely mumbles as he muttered under his breath. This isn't dissipation potion. You have no proof. But these words were heard by Granger. Granger practically wanted to kill him for that. Fuck, you still want proof? Are you trying to get me to drink this dissipation potion? Come here, take Magic Apprentice Cruz out, and watch him strictly. Magic Apprentice Cruz might be related to some incidents. In a bit, the Alchemist Guild will send someone to investigate him. The world in front of the young magic apprentice turned dark as he was dragged out of the meeting room. While Cruz was being dragged away, a staff member came up and took a look at the alchemy formula. But the situation in the meeting room was a bit hectic. Granger was busy making arrangements. Lin Yin was busy sneering at him, and Beisoro was busy recording the events of the hearing. And as for the remaining great mage, he was dozing off for some reason. Thus, no one was thinking about the formula. This, Mage Merlin, this was a misunderstanding, truly a misunderstanding. Granger's forced smiling face looked more like an unsightly crying face. Originally, as an esteemed great alchemist, even if Granger made a mistake, he still wouldn't try to curry favor with some inexperienced mage by apologizing. But Beisoro had told him about the matter of Solomon escorting Lin Yin earlier, whatever the reason for that was, when they were discussing the outcome of the hearing. Granger really felt startled and miserable at that revelation. The one that the Monchi family wanted him to handle this time was truly a dangerous person. Had it novel been at. If he had known this earlier, forget magic materials. Even if the Monchi family opened their own warehouse to him, he still wouldn't agree. Solomon had never personally escorted someone like this for the past 20 years. Last time, Solomon had only walked Ryan of the Monchi family to his door in the Sage Tower, and that alone had been enough to make huge waves in Thousand Sail City. But this Mafa Merlin was personally escorted back to the Gilded Rose. Granger felt cold sweat dripping from his back. Regarding the matter of Granger obviously tried to curry favor with him, Lin Yin only laughed, not saying anything. However, he didn't continue to make things difficult for the other side, because Lin Yin knew that someone would come to find him soon. Sure enough, while Granger was trying to think of every possible way to justify himself, another staff member entered the reception room and whispered a few sentences in Beisoro's ears. Beisoro, who had still been sorting the records of the hearing, froze before suddenly standing up and looking at Lin Yin, his expression full of doubt and shock. Beisoro stood there in a daze for a long time before letting out a gulp. Mage Merlin, what is it, great alchemist Beisoro? Your esteemed alchemy formula. By any chance, is there a missing part? The tone Beisoro used was very respectful this time. Anyone would be shocked to see a great alchemist speak so respectfully to a young mage. After all, Beisoro was one of the most important members of the Alchemist Guild, his status above Granger's. The number of people he would talk so respectfully to could be counted on 2 hands in the entire Alchemist Guild. No, in the entire Thousand Sail City. But Beisoro was now being very polite to Lin Yin. It was because the leader of the Alchemist Guild, Liss, had sent someone to give an order. Ask Mage Merlin if he would be willing to give the rest of the alchemy formula in exchange for a chance to study in the Mercury Tower for 3 months. Beisoro's expression became strange when he heard this. The Mercury Tower was essentially the kingdom's holy land of alchemy. Every alchemist dreamt of going there because it not only had the best atmosphere, but also had the most comprehensive and profound stores of alchemy-related knowledge. With enough luck, one might be able to get pointers from master alchemists. But the Mercury Tower rarely got in contact with the outside world, and it wouldn't recruit disciples externally. The alchemists, they were like monks, immersing themselves in their studies day after day, year after year. To some extent, the Mercury Tower could be considered an independent kingdom, one that only existed for the advancement of alchemy. That independent kingdom was practically isolated from the rest of the world. Only when the legendary masters needed to replace their assistants would outsiders get an opportunity to enter the Mercury Tower. These opportunities were very rare. At the very most, only 10 people would have this opportunity in a given year, and every major alchemist guild like the one in Thousand Sail City would obtain one spot every few years. Baisoro himself had been applying for over 10 years, and although he hadn't been chosen yet, he never gave up. After all, Baisoro knew that due to his innate level of talent, he had already approached the limit of his path of alchemy. If he only relied on hard work, he could end up stuck at his current level for years. If he wanted to progress further, he had to enter the Mercury Tower and gain access to the profound knowledge and the help of those legendary master alchemists. But that opportunity was too difficult to obtain. Even though Baisoro's status in the Alchemist Guild wasn't low at all, getting a chance to enter the Mercury Tower was based on luck. But now, this kind of opportunity was actually being offered in exchange for an alchemy formula. Baisoro's expression became quite strange as he thought about it. It wasn't because of him missing out on the opportunity to go to the Mercury Tower, but rather because of the implied value of that alchemy formula. Although List's reputation in Thousand Sail City wasn't as awe-inspiring as that of someone like Solomon, his prestige within the Alchemist Guild wasn't something that an outsider could imagine. His status here was nearly that of a god. For complicated and important decisions, as long as List said something, the rest of the Alchemist Guild wouldn't dare to go against it. This wasn't the same as Solomon in the Sage Tower. Although Solomon might have power that shook the entire Thousand Sail City, he was only one of the 3 members of a council in the Sage Tower. For important decisions, they would have to convene a meeting and the 3 of them would come to a decision together. But List reigned supreme in the Alchemist Guild, every final decision depending on his word, like a dictatorship. Just like now, with the precious opportunity to go to the Mercury Tower being decided in a word by List, and no one questioning it. Even Baisoro, who had been continuously applying for 10 years, could only look at Linyan with envy. Great alchemist Baisoro, this question isn't very appropriate. Linyan looked at Baisoro with a smile that didn't quite look like a smile. Although he didn't say it outright, the ridicule contained in his smile was obvious. Baisoro's expression became awkward when he heard Linyan's answer. That question indeed wasn't very proper. For alchemy shops, their formulas were everything. Whoever had better alchemy formulas, whoever could craft better items, those shops would occupy a bigger share of the market. Even a small shop like the Gilded Rose, whose sales were on the scale of a few 100,000 gold, would become the focus of Thousand Sail City after the appearance of the Hope Potion. Once the hearing was over, the business would inevitably become very prosperous. As long as they didn't make any mistakes, it would only be a matter of time before they became the #1 alchemy shop of Thousand Sail City. The kind of core knowledge that could decide between success and failure. It truly wasn't appropriate to ask about it, but disregarding it was out of the question. Mage Merlin, our Alchemist Guild isn't asking for your formula for free. We wish to trade for it. Oh, how about 1 million gold? How could Linyan not understand the value of the missing part of the formula? Any alchemist that was worth their salt wouldn't be willing to part with something like this. Thus, Baisoro's offer of 1 million gold only earned a chuckle from Linyan. How about this? Baisoro became immediately worried when he heard Linyan's reaction and immediately changed the offer. Formulas for your formula. As long as you are willing to let us know this formula, our Alchemist Guild will trade you 5 unique formulas. We guarantee that these 5 formulas are unique to the Alchemist Guild, and you won't find them anywhere else in Thousand Sail City. Baisoro was sweating crazily as he wondered, why is he still chuckling? An esteemed great alchemist was giving him a generous offer. But yet this fellow seemed to find the situation amusing. At this time, Besoro felt his heart freezing. Force isn't an option. This is someone supported by Solomon. If that old butcher is unhappy, even leader Lys might suffer, he thought to himself. Moreover, that Mafa Merlin is most likely a great mage. Just the display of that wind blade was enough to prove it. 3 great mages weren't able to react. If they really fought, Besoro didn't have the confidence to survive. When considering his strength and background, that Mafa Merlin already had the qualifications to stand on an equal footing with Besoro. Not to mention, he had also brought out an alchemy formula that even leader Lys was interested in. Facing such a person, even if Besoro was unwilling, he had no choice but to rein in his temper and negotiate. Ultimately, Besoro clenched his teeth and took out his trump card. Okay, Mage Merlin, how about if we give you the opportunity to enter the Mercury Tower for 3 months in exchange for the last part of the alchemy formula? As Besoro forced himself to say this, his face became twisted. Gone. Another opportunity gone like that. But immediately afterward, Besoro saw the young mage smile brightly and respond, "No deal. No deal." Besoro was startled. His expression was like he had just seen his own wife following someone into a hotel. No deal. Besoro's mind was in a mess due to that one sentence. No. How could you not want this deal? This time, Besoro didn't care about his prestige as he stared at Lin Yun in disbelief. If not for him still being wary of the young mage's shocking power, Besoro might have grabbed his neck and shook him while asking if he was a fool. How could he possibly turn down such an incredible offer? Doesn't he know what it means to get to study at the Mercury Tower? Doesn't he know how many alchemists keep applying every year only to end up failing? I am one of those alchemists. Okay, great alchemist Besoro, I am willing to trade this alchemy formula, but I am not interested in studying at the Mercury Tower. Seeing Besoro's emotional response, Lin Yun felt a bit bad about keeping him in suspense. After thinking for a moment, he gave a small hint. In fact, one of the reasons Lin Yun had come to the hearing today was precisely to sell this alchemy formula. He knew that he would get a chance to demonstrate its effects. As for the rest, such as the matter of making Granger feel as if he had been slapped in public, it was merely done casually. Otherwise, Lin Yun wouldn't have written a quad formula alchemy formula. If he only wanted to prove that Magic Apprentice Cruz had drunk a dissipation potion, Lin Yun had 100 different methods that he could have used. He wouldn't have to use such a troublesome one. Thus Lin Yun wrote a quad formula alchemy formula while hiding the most important one. A normal great alchemist might not have noticed it, but those peak great alchemists who had been in that realm for many years, thirsting to reach the master realm, would inevitably notice that this quad formula alchemy formula had a part missing. That part of the formula was the core. As long as that final part of the alchemy formula was integrated with the rest, the entire formula would undergo heaven-defying changes. When compounding it, it would create a new kind of potion, something that would be enough for great alchemists to enter the ranks of master alchemists. Therefore, what Lin Yun wanted to sell today was, in fact, an opportunity to become a master alchemist. This was a lot more precious than an opportunity to study at the Mercury Tower. Moreover, entering the Mercury Tower was only a matter of gaining knowledge to Lin Yun, and Lin Yun didn't lack knowledge at all. Lin Yun was currently lacking in alchemists. The only place that could quickly offer him a lot of alchemists at a viable price was the Alchemist Guild. But he didn't need to tell Besoro that. Lin Yun only gave Besoro a hint to prod him to come and properly chat with him about business. All right, great alchemist Besoro, I think the Alchemist Guild should carefully investigate the matter of who it was that slandered the Gilded Rose. This is obviously challenging the rules of the industry. If it ever happened again, the prestige of the Alchemist Guild would definitely be adversely affected. Had it novel been at. Lin Yun didn't give Besoro an opportunity to reply. After he said what he wanted, he left the spacious reception room. The 3 great alchemists were left behind, staring at his back. They were dumbstruck for a good while. No wonder Granger always said that these ruthless merchants were all troublesome characters. Mage Merlin clearly wanted to retaliate against the person that slandered him, But by using such a dignified reason, he could make it seem like he was actually worried about the possibility that the Alchemist Guild's prestige might suffer. No, Besoro was stunned there for a while before he suddenly noticed something wrong. He wasn't just instigating the Alchemist Guild to make a move. This was most likely a hint. After thinking about it, Besoro suddenly understood. Indeed, he must be hinting that the Alchemist Guild should give an account to the Gilded Rose. If anyone else tried this, Besoro would most likely just spit at them. How could the Alchemist Guild be pushed into making a move so easily, and even be asked to give an account on top of that? But now, not only did Besoro refrain from being impolite, but he even almost laughed out loud. Although Mage Merlin declined the opportunity to study in the Mercury Tower, he did say that the alchemy formula could be traded. In other words, it wasn't that Mage Merlin was unwilling to trade it at all, but that the initial offer wasn't satisfying enough. Negotiations were still open. As long as he didn't completely reject the idea, Besoro could still find another way. Mage Merlin isn't satisfied with the offer? That's easy enough to solve. Change the offer until he is satisfied. Once he managed to obtain the alchemy formula, Leader Lys might be happy enough with his work to give him that opportunity to study in the Mercury Tower. The only problem now was whether he could satisfy Mage Merlin. But it did seem that there was an opportunity. The more Besoro thought about it, the more excited he became. After some time, he bade farewell to his two colleagues, and without looking back, he left the reception room with his papers. After leaving the reception room, Besoro restrained his excitement while hurrying to the study room of Leader Lys. Usually, Lys would be in his study at this time, either reading or receiving a guest, so he should have the time to report his findings to Leader Lys there. But halfway there, Besoro's footsteps slowed down. He suddenly recalled Lin Yun's final words. Although he was certain that this was a sort of hint, he hadn't really confirmed anything. If he hastily reported the matter of the trade to Leader Lys, and everything went well, then it would be good. But if something happened and Leader Lys didn't get that alchemy formula in the end, it would be a serious problem. Let alone not getting a chance to go to the Mercury Tower this time. He might never get a chance to go there for the rest of his life. No good. I can't go to Leader Lys just yet. I have to finalize the deal with Mage Merlin first. Upon realizing this, Besoro stopped and headed back toward the reception room, while also sending someone to call Mullen over. Great Alchemist Besoro, what is your instruction? Mullen was a lot different from when he was at the Gilded Rose, not acting arrogant at all. In front of Besoro, he was wearing a fawning smile. The difference between the status of an alchemist and a great alchemist was huge, not to mention that Besoro was a higher-up of the Alchemist Guild who was trusted by Leader Lys. His status was even higher than Granger's. Mullen would usually do his best to curry favor with his superiors, so he wouldn't dare to waste his time. I heard that the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce made some large moves lately. Yes, President Monchi of the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce is worthy of being called Thousand Sail City's boldest merchant. This time, he opened 10 alchemy shops all at once. Hearing Besoro's tone, Mullen knew that he was being asked to give a report of the situation. From what I saw, it won't be long until the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce is able to monopolize the alchemy market of Thousand Sail City like the previous flashing Gold Chamber of Commerce did. Besoro frowned slightly. He was a bit dissatisfied with Mullen's words. I didn't call you over to hear you flatter the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce. What use is there in telling me that? Originally, Besoro had still felt that Mullen was quite efficient at gathering information and usually was very keen and discerning when handling his work. Moreover, Mullen had been trying especially hard to curry favor with him, so Besoro had intended to give him a chance. But ultimately, Mullen failed to draw the proper conclusions. Seems like I should distance myself from this idiot to not get implicated by him later on. Mullen didn't know that those few ill-timed, flattering sentences had actually just ruined his own future. Meanwhile, Mullen still wanted to show off in front of the Great Alchemist. All right, Great Alchemist Besoro, I already sent a congratulatory gift on your behalf when the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce opened their business. Besoro suddenly stopped breathing. He stared ferociously at Mullen with his eyes wide open. You must be kidding. Jolted by this discovery, Besoro nearly jumped up. I'm trying to distance myself from the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce. And you actually used my name to send a congratulatory gift. Do you want to speed up my downfall? Basoro was inwardly panicking at this point. I'm done. I was truly done in by that bastard Mullen. After all, the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce was the one that embarrassed the Gilded Rose. It would be a big problem if Mage Merlin found out that I sent a congratulatory gift to the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce. He wouldn't need to do much to retaliate. Refusing to trade that alchemy formula would be enough. If Leader List gets angry, who knows how many people will be out of luck. Who told you to send a gift on my behalf? He lashed out. Mullen froze. He looked at Basoro, who had suddenly become angry and didn't know what to do. He felt stunned and genuinely surprised. What's going on? The relationship between great alchemist Basoro and the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce was usually pretty good. There shouldn't be any problem at all with sending a congratulatory gift for the opening of their shops. So why would great alchemist Basoro become so angry at him for doing this? For some time, Mullen didn't dare to say a word. He only looked at Basoro while frozen in fright. Now, immediately, get on a horse and go to the Twin Moons alchemy shop. If you can stir up some trouble, do so. The more trouble you cause for me, the better. Basoro felt hard-pressed, so he ended the discussion and ordered Mullen to go back with this strange task. What? Why aren't you getting on the move? Yes. After sending Mullen away, Basoro massaged his temples and thought to himself, damn, keeping my distance from that Mullen is truly wise. What if I ended up dead because of that idiot? In the past few days, the most sensational matter was undoubtedly the opening of the Monchi family's alchemy shops. They opened 10 shops at the same time, one of which was the Twin Moon Splendor, located in the victorious Return Street. It was acclaimed as Thousand Sail City's biggest alchemy shop. It had the best magic equipment, the most mystical potions, and the most advanced alchemy skills. It even had a great alchemist personally overseeing it. The person in charge of Twin Moon Splendor was the butler of the Monchi family, Jonathan. These past 2 days, Jonathan had been in a very good mood. First, it was because of the opening of Twin Moon Splendor, his master entrusted him with a heavy responsibility, being in charge of the biggest alchemy shop in all of Thousand Sail City. And second, he was feeling gleeful because Jonathan knew that the Alchemist Guild was currently holding a hearing. It was the hearing of Maffa Merlin, the one that had made Fallow slap him twice at the Blackhorn auction. Although the results of the hearing had yet to come out, Jonathan was already celebrating internally. He knew that before the hearing started, his master had sent young Master Ryan to pay a visit to one of the hosts of the hearing, Great Alchemist Granger. Moreover, he had offered precious magic materials that any great alchemist wouldn't be able to refuse. As long as Granger messed around with the hearing, Maffa would only be able to end up crying in front of the Alchemist Guild. At that time, he would be able to relish in that upstart's misery while simultaneously clearing away the rival of Twin Moon Splendor, thus making him feel quite cheerful. Jonathan kept smiling for the entire afternoon. By the time evening fell, Mullen had come to pay a visit, and Jonathan's smile bloomed. Jonathan felt quite sure that Mullen was here to bring good news. Alchemist Mullen, please sit. Please sit. Jonathan had a cordial smile on his face as he personally welcomed Mullen into the shop with an eager expression on his face. Alchemist Mullen, I've been waiting for you for many days. Had it novel been at? To be honest, Mullen felt quite favorable toward Jonathan. This wasn't the first time the two men had come into contact with each other. One was supervising the alchemy businesses on behalf of the Alchemist Guild, while the other was the most trusted butler of the Monchi family. Moreover, the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce recently stepped foot into the alchemy market, so the number of times the two met had risen sharply. Last time, for example, Mullen had delivered a congratulatory gift in Basoro's name, and Jonathan had personally received it. Compared with those madmen in the guild who were always obsessed with alchemy, Jonathan clearly treated people a lot better. It was a butler's specialty. The last time they met, Mullen had felt like he had been cleansed. He had a very good feeling about Jonathan. But a good feeling was only a good feeling. Compared to his future, even the best feelings would have to be put aside. I don't need to sit. Jonathan, I came for a different matter this time. After Molin entered Twin Moon Splendor, he ignored the butler's polite greeting and maintained a strict business attitude. Haha, Alchemist Molin, you sure like making jokes. Seeing Molin's demeanor, Jonathan's expression stiffened. Although he forced himself to smile, that kind of smile looked very artificial. Jonathan wasn't an idiot. When he heard Molin's words, he knew that things were amiss. After all, he was the butler of the Manchi family. Others might not specifically feel that Jonathan was worthy of respect, but they had to give some respect to Master Manchi. Not to mention Molin. Even his backer, great alchemist Besoro, would always give Manchi the proper respect by addressing his butler as Butler Jonathan instead of using his name directly. Jonathan knew that there was one situation when others didn't call him Butler Jonathan in a formal greeting, which was when the reputation of Master Manchi was useless. Like that time in the Blackhorn auction, Philo had called him Jonathan and then fiercely slapped him afterwards. It's no joke, Jonathan. I came this time because someone reported some issues with the quality of your materials, so I came for a routine inspection. How? How could this be? Faced with Molin's words, Jonathan's heart started beating violently. The reason for Jonathan's panic wasn't that he thought there might be an issue with the quality. After all, although it was common practice among alchemy shops to sell large quantities of goods without regard for quality, the Twin Moon Splendor had only been open for a few days, and it urgently needed to be successful. Manchi even personally instructed that he would rather take a loss to ensure that the items sold by the Twin Moon's Splendor were of superior quality. As for whether there could still be a problem under these circumstances, Jonathan would be the first one to deny it. But the problem was that this wasn't a matter that could be fixed with just Jonathan's words. Jonathan clearly understood this. The quality of many alchemy products was unclear at first sight. Alchemists weren't machines, and no matter how outstanding an alchemist was, he couldn't guarantee that none of the items would have any defects whatsoever. As long as Molin spent enough time, he would find some products with quality issues sooner or later. This wasn't something that Master Manchi would solve with a few sentences, or something that the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce could settle with some money. Alchemist Molin, please listen to me. Jonathan became worried as he thought of the possible outcome. He didn't care whether it was rude as he reached out to grab Molin's hands. Please listen, there is no issue with our Twin Moon Splendor's alchemy products. Let go. Molin coldly looked at Jonathan. Are you kidding me? He thought to himself. Just because you say that there is no problem, there is no problem? It doesn't matter what you say in this matter. Even my words are worthless. This came from great alchemist Besoro. Great alchemist Besoro himself, one of the higher-ups of the Alchemy Guild. He is second only to Leader Liss. Do you know what great alchemist Besoro said? He sent me to immediately create trouble for the Twin Moon Splendor, and the more the better. In this situation, let alone being acquainted with me. Even if you were a relative, I still wouldn't give you any respect. But out loud, he only assured, It's okay, Jonathan. It's just a mere formality. You'd better cooperate. After speaking these words, Molin ignored Jonathan and directed the black-robed alchemist to inspect the goods. This is bad. Seeing Molin's attitude, Jonathan knew that this was a terrible situation. He could see that every one of Molin's black-robed subordinates was looking seriously at the items as they performed the inspection. Moreover, once they were done with an item, it would be handed to Molin for another check. How could a routine inspection be so detailed and conscientious? Jonathan had a bad feeling growing within. Oh no, this is terrible. The way Molin was proceeding, he would find something wrong sooner or later, and at that time, they would definitely have to go through a hearing. The Twin Moon Splendor, which had just started doing business, couldn't afford this. And the first one to suffer from Master Manchi's wrath would definitely be Jonathan. Jonathan looked at Molin with a complicated expression, his mind completely at a loss. What is going on? Although he didn't have a deep relationship with Molin, the benefits were never lacking, so Molin had guaranteed that he would help as much as he could if the Twin Moon Splendor had a problem. To be honest, Jonathan didn't have much hope of finding a resolution, but he couldn't really accept Molin becoming hostile so suddenly. Has he been incited by someone else to do this? Of course, someone is definitely behind this. Jonathan understood. Molin's power in the Alchemist Guild wasn't small, but Molin shouldn't be able to do something like this of his own initiative. The Twin Moon Splendor was a property of the Manchi family, after all. Molin's actions meant that the Alchemist Guild was opposing the Manchi family. One problem would lead to a dispute between the two major forces. Molin wasn't that bold. But if it isn't Molin, then who is it? Who could be capable of influencing the Alchemist Guild's decision and having Molin cause trouble for the Twin Moon Splendor? The more Jonathan thought about it, the more alarmed he felt. These, and these bring all of these back. As Jonathan was filled with mounting dread, Molin gave a few orders as he pointed at about a dozen items. The scene nearly made Jonathan cry. And it wasn't over yet. Jonathan, I am regretfully informing you that there are indeed some severe issues with the products being sold by the Twin Moon Splendor. We will need to conduct an investigation to see how grave this is. Until then, the Twin Moon Splendor will have to temporarily close down. We will notify you when you can reopen. What? Close down? Jonathan was startled by the harshness of the decision. For an alchemy shop, what was the difference between closing down and going out of business? Especially for a shop like the Twin Moon Splendor that had just begun operating. Closing down, just as their reputation was about to shoot up, meant that all their efforts would be wasted. They had already sunk in over 1 million gold. Molin's sentence was like making them throw away 1 million gold. Had it novel been at? This was too vicious. At this point, Jonathan really wanted to ask who it was that was targeting the Twin Moon Splendor. Unfortunately, Molin didn't even give him the opportunity to ask. After pronouncing his judgment, he had his black-gowned subordinates secure those dozen alchemy items he had indicated and immediately left. Jonathan stood by himself for a very long time, grinding his teeth as he asked out loud, "Who the hell is targeting the Twin Moon Splendor?" Jonathan naturally wouldn't know that the accursed culprit didn't even take this matter seriously. Baisoro hadn't come to the wrong conclusion. The words Lin Yun said when he left were indeed a hint. Lin Yun was that kind of person, after all. Since someone wanted to act against the Gilded Rose, Lin Yun wouldn't mind using the Alchemist Guild to ruthlessly counterattack. But that was all. Who schemed against him and why they did so? Finding out these things wasn't something Lin Yun was interested in. Time was too valuable for a mage, and it wasn't worth wasting any to deal with these matters. Knowing that the Alchemist Guild wanted to obtain that part of alchemy formula was enough. If they wanted to obtain that part of alchemy formula, they would inevitably have to satisfy him. So before departing, he left them quite the obvious hint. Someone made a move on me, and I'm very dissatisfied. The Alchemist Guild would then have to come up with a possible method to satisfy him. To Lin Yun, the matter was that simple. As for what the Alchemist Guild would do next, Lin Yun didn't really care. In any case, it wouldn't be long before someone came to tell him how it all concluded. His time was very precious, and he had spent multiple afternoons working on the magic array. How could he still have time to be concerned about such a trivial matter? In the past few days, Lin Yun had remained in the Sage Tower in order to complete the magic array. The entire process took Lin Yun 3 days, but when he returned, Molin was seizing the items of the Gilded Rose. Over these past 3 days, Lin Yun had more or less completed the magic array. It was far from being perfect, but it was close. Nothing could be done about it, as the magic array was truly too special. It could be said that among the various magic-conducting runes, the magic array was the most special one. This was a magic-conducting rune whose complexity and details had been taken to the extreme. This was probably why magic-conducting rune creation paradigm referred to that magic-conducting rune as the discarded rune or worthless rune. It was all because the great mages of this era weren't able to perfect the magic-conducting rune system. Even if someone had the magic array, they would only use it like it was an ordinary magic-conducting rune. As a result, it would only be able to display less than 1/10 of its true might. It wasn't without reason that it was also known as the discarded rune or worthless rune. If someone wanted to truly display the magic array's might, they would have to continuously polish it. The magic array had nearly unlimited adaptability. Every metamagic and spell could perfectly blend in the magic array. What could happen when there were only one or two kinds used within? But when enough metamagics and spells were blended together, the magic array would have a fundamental change. It would become a magic conducting rune that would greatly increase the level of those metamagics and spells. It was precisely because of that property that the magic array was known as one of the strongest magic conductors. Lin Yun's first priority now was to continue perfecting the magic array. This was a task that would take time. For more than half of the following month, Lin Yun remained inside the alchemy laboratory, spending all his time polishing and improving the magic array. Spell after spell, metamagic after metamagic, all of it was gradually blended into the magic array system one by one. And as they were merged, the magic array kept changing all the time. The change was very small at the start, to the point that even Lin Yun couldn't perceive it. But ultimately, Lin Yun could tell that the might of these spells and metamagics greatly improved after merging with the magic array. Furthermore, as more and more spells and metamagics were infused, Lin Yun was able to try combining and arranging them. This was the most frightening part of the magic array. A complete magic array could be considered this world's most complicated and most detailed magic conducting rune, because the entire magic array was made up of spells and metamagics in a manner similar to a convoluted alchemy formula. Great mages with a properly completed magic array could combine these spells and metamagics as they pleased, and every proper combination would increase their might to a new level. At it novel Benedette. Unfortunately, Lin Yun's current magic array was far from complete, and not only was there just a single magic array at the moment, but that array was also still very weak. He could only merge a few low-level spells and metamagics in right now. Lin Yun would only dare to try merging a powerful metamagic like Elemental Incarnation once he reached the 5th rank. For all great mages, the 5th rank was a very pivotal rank. When a great mage reached 5th rank, it meant that they had completed half of their magic conducting rune. Regardless of what kind of magic conducting rune they had, their might would be displayed by this point. This was true to an even greater degree for a great mage with a magic array. Such a 5th rank great mage could have 5 magic arrays, and not only would he be able to merge even more spells and metamagics, but he could also thoroughly stabilize the magic array system. From that moment, a great mage with magic arrays would have the power to be able to fight against a high mage. But becoming a 5th rank great mage was still something far in the distance for Lin Yun. Having this extremely complicated and detailed magic conducting rune was Lin Yun's fortune, but also his misfortune. The fortunate part was that once Lin Yun became a 5th rank great mage, he would indeed have the power to contend against a high mage. The unfortunate part was that the path Lin Yun would walk would be a lot more difficult than that of other great mages. The first magic array took Lin Yun more than half a month to complete. Over the course of this period, Lin Yun had merged 5 spells and 4 metamagics. Completing his first magic array with such a large amount of merging would have been seen as astonishing, even during the peak of the magic civilization. When Lin Yun finally left the alchemy laboratory, he was haggard, his face was pale, and his steps were dragging. It looked as if he would fall down if he wasn't careful. But his bloodshot eyes were shining frighteningly, and some faint runes could even be seen in his eyes. If Solomon were present at this time, he would inevitably notice that this young man's strength had undergone an earth-shattering change. The Lin Yun from half a month ago was on a totally different level from the current Lin Yun. This was due to the changes brought by the magic array system. Lin Yun had planned to look for the old butler once he came out from the alchemy laboratory to ask how the business was doing. But once he stepped outside, he noticed a small silhouette who had already been waiting at the doorway. "Ah, Boss Merlin, you finally came out." Remy looked like he had been waiting for quite a while. He seemed very sleepy, and when he saw Lin Yun, he raised his hands to massage his eyes before daring to greet Lin Yun. "Did you wait for a long time?" Noticing Remy's pallid appearance, Lin Yun couldn't help frowning a bit. The old butler had promised Lin Yun that once he entered the alchemy laboratory, no one would be allowed to disturb him. Even if a huge matter came about, it would have to wait until he came out himself. For Remy to wait at the door until he fell asleep meant that something had definitely happened to the Gilded Rose. No, not long. Let's go, you can explain on the way. Lin Yun led Remy downstairs while he asked, "Did something happen to the shop?" "Yes, indeed. The goods we delivered to Edge Rift were seized by the Viper Nest people." "The Viper Nest?" Lin Yun frowned. Not long ago, Lin Yun had used a ghost potion to obtain the cooperation of the Silver Moon mercenaries, including a deal to purchase their products. Ever since then, the Silver Moon mercenaries had purchased quite a few alchemy products from a Gilded Rose. In the beginning, these alchemy items could be delivered to the Lion Monarch Main Street. But with the Silver Moon mercenaries departing on their campaign to Edge Rift, the transport of the goods had to be done by the Gilded Rose. And in the end, a mere alchemy store was far from having the armed caravans that the former flashing Gold Chamber of Commerce had. The 10 following shipments had used up a lot of manpower, yet they still were robbed twice. Fortunately, the Silver Moon mercenaries promptly provided support and no major loss was suffered. But those 2 robberies were only done by ordinary bandits. They were on the scale of a dozen people or so at most, and had been eliminated by the Silver Moon mercenaries. As for the more well-known forces of Thousand Sail City, no one dared to make a move. After all, this was the partner of the Silver Moon mercenaries. Ordinary forces wouldn't even have time to hide after offending such a group. So who would dare to recklessly make a rash move? Not to mention the Viper Nest. How could it be the Viper Nest? Honestly, Lin Yun couldn't understand. Was the Viper Nest's leader an idiot? How could they dare to seize the alchemy items that were purchased by the Silver Moon mercenaries? Aren't they afraid of Sasu bringing his great sword to their door? Oh right, Remy, when did this happen? Yesterday afternoon. The 5 alchemy apprentices that went along were also captured. Boss Pave just went out to request their release from the Viper Nest. All right, I understand. Give me the list of the items that were shipped. Understood, Boss Merlin. Remy quickly fetched the requested list of items. Over a dozen kinds of products were indexed on it, most of which were medicines. After asking Remy, Lin Yun learnt that this was due to the Silver Moon mercenaries' expedition in Edge Rift not going too well. They had already suffered a lot of casualties while still outside of Edge Rift, and thus, the recent orders consisted mostly of alchemy medicine. Alchemy medicine. Lin Yun understood a bit. This was probably trouble caused by the Hope Potion. If this was truly the case, then there was no need to worry, because Lin Yun was certain that the men of the Viper Nest would appear before him sooner or later. Lin Yun put down the list and didn't ask anything else. He waited calmly by himself in the Gilded Rose. As it turned out, Lin Yun didn't have to wait long at all. 1 hour later, Remy knocked at his door. Boss Merlin, Boss Merlin. Remy's worried voice came from behind the door. Lin Yun was surprisingly calm as he asked, "What? Someone came?" Yes. 2 people came, a mage and a fighter. They introduced themselves as members of the Viper Nest, and they want to speak to the owner of the Gilded Rose. At it, Novel Benedette. Good, I understand. Greet them first, I'll follow soon. Lin Yun changed into a clean, black robe before slowly walking toward the reception room. As he pushed the door open, he caught sight of the 2 waiting guests. One of them was a red-haired man of medium stature, and he seemed to be about 40 years old. His face was marred by a very long scar, which made him look quite fierce. He was wearing red-colored leather armor. On his right side, there was a great sword emitting faint magic fluctuations. It seemed to be a pretty decent weapon. With a glance, Lin Yun came to the conclusion that this was a great swordsman, and one that had recently advanced. Only the great swordsmen who had recently advanced would be unable to completely control their aura. With an aura constantly leaking out, it was fairly easy to estimate one's strength. This was the same for a great mage who had recently crushed their mana whirlpool. But it wasn't the case for the current Lin Yun. Besides runes flashing in his eyes from time to time, people usually wouldn't be able to grasp Lin Yun's real strength through magic fluctuations, as he had much better control. This person who had recently advanced to become a great swordsman had a companion with him, and moreover, that person was an acquaintance. It was that 9th-rank mage who had accompanied Ferio to catch a thief in Lin Yun's house, along with a group from the Viper Nest. But they never ended up catching that thief, as the ninth rank mage himself was forced to follow Lin Yun inside and be questioned for a long time. Mage Larry, long time no see. Lin Yun greeted him very politely after entering the reception room. The ninth rank mage had originally been sitting there feeling very satisfied, resting his eyes while waiting for someone to come receive them. Thus, when he heard Lin Yun's voice, Larry immediately stiffened up. He opened his eyes in disbelief before instantly jumping up to his feet. "Ma, Mage Merlin." "Ha ha, Mage Larry, we meet again." "Ha, ha, ha, yes, such a coincidence." Larry was smiling stiffly while thinking of slapping himself. Damn, how could I forget that the Gilded Rose is owned by that family? I actually came over like an idiot, he thought regretfully. This guy is a monster that was able to use meta magic a dozen times without even getting short of breath. When he thought back to that scene, the ninth rank mage couldn't help discreetly moving to hide behind the body of the fighter. "What's going on?" The great swordsman threw a strange glance at his companion, feeling rather puzzled. Mage Larry, who was famous for being vicious and merciless, was behaving a bit strangely. "No, nothing." Larry raised his head and saw Lin Yun looking at him and immediately shrank back, unwilling to say another word. Fortunately, the great swordsman didn't take it to heart. If he didn't get an answer after asking, then that was that. He would move on with his own matters. His hands were on the table of the reception room as he kept leaking his aura, giving a somewhat oppressive feeling. "You are Maffa Merlin?" "Indeed, I am Maffa Merlin." Lin Yun nodded before sitting in front of the great swordsman. "Good. Merlin, I came today to ask you something. The Gilded Rose, under your name, has intruded 4 times on the territory of the Viper Nest. Are you trying to test the limits of the Viper Nest tolerance?" The great swordsman's attitude was very aggressive, clearly showing how he was intent on getting the upper hand in the conversation. Someone less courageous might be scared by this display. Unfortunately for him, Lin Yun wasn't spineless. Can I ask you something?" Lin Yun didn't blink as he looked closely at the great swordsman. "Who are you?" The great swordsman almost choked in surprise. "I asked you a question so fiercely. How could you ask something as trivial as that? Out of every answer you could have given, why would you ask my name?" "Okay, calm down, relax." The great swordsman counted to 10 in his mind, forcing himself to calm down before proudly answering, "I am Rios." Rios? I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time," Lin Yun drawled while yawning. Rios' calmness was extinguished. "Maffa Merlin, don't interrupt me. I came today to ask you why your flashing gold chamber of commerce's caravan intruded on the Viper Nest territory 4 times. Are you trying to provoke the Viper Nest?" "Absolutely not." "That's good." Rios' expression eased up slightly. Although this Maffa Merlin's attitude was dislikable, it seemed that he fortunately knew of the fearsomeness of the Viper Nest. Rios coughed to clear his throat before putting his hands on the table once more. While wearing a lofty expression, he demanded, "Our Viper Nest needs an explanation." "What explanation?" "You should think about what kind of explanation you should show us." "You are asking for compensation?" "HMPF." Rios snorted coldly, but he inwardly rejoiced. "It seems like I have a talent for negotiations." With just a simple scare, this fellow became sincere. "Wait until I get the Hope Potion formula. Boss Sauce will definitely reward me. It's a pity that this idiot Larry will get a share of my credit." "Oh right, speaking of Larry." Rios thought it was rather strange. How come Larry started acting all weird ever since Maffa Merlin appeared? He seems like a mouse meeting a cat.